For Jill, every morning began like clockwork. Wake up at 7. Breakfast by 8:30, then time to rouse her dad for work. After a quick taste test of the soup perfect, she moved on to her next task. The young woman called out that breakfast was ready, trying to stir him from his sleep. But nothing. Peeking into his room, she called his name again. It seemed he was completely lost in dreamland. She gave his shoulder a gentle nudge to avoid startling him, but her dad didn't budge. So she began shaking him for real. If he didn't get up now, he would be late for his job. His only response was a confused moo. That's when Jill let out a room-shaking scream. It was loud enough to make the neighbor think he'd suddenly become a father. June's eyes flew open as a terrifying scream ripped through his quiet room. He shot up in bed, his eyes darting around frantically. Sweat formed on his brow from the sudden awakening, and then he saw her. Jill was standing right there, screaming her lungs out to wake him. And in that instant, he remembered he had a contract daughter for 2 months. Seeing that June was awake, she cut the scream and flashed a brilliant smile. She chirped that breakfast was served, and it was officially time for him to get up. 10 years ago, the world changed when mysterious faults tore open the fabric of reality. At first, humanity had no idea how to handle them. People were terrified first by the rifts, then by what crawled out of them. Monsters poured out in endless waves, an unstoppable tide of destruction. But at the same time, certain people awakened incredible, strange new abilities. They became known as hunters, able to view their powers like a video game interface. These hunters rose to protect civilization, fighting back the monsters from the rifts. June, however, didn't possess any of these special skills. So he hit the books and looked for a career fit for a normal person. After graduation, he became the youngest civil servant in the fault management department. His lack of any real talent made his work a constant struggle. He was always forgetting reports and running late. But after a full year of trying his best, he finally received his very first assignment at a fault. Thrilled for his first mission, he headed out to the rift. But disaster was waiting for him. On the way to his assignment, he was struck by a truck. A brilliant flash and impact. He braced for pain, but there was none. He opened his eyes to a world he didn't recognize. The shocked locals explained that he had arrived in a world known as Murim. It was a brutal world where he died, countless times enduring unimaginable suffering. But every time he died, he was reborn, forced to start the day all over again, because his arrival in Murim had granted him one special ability, a pocket watch that rewound time by 1 day upon his death. June repeated the loop, endlessly determined to survive and finally win. He died so many times he almost forgot who he used to be. With each reset, he learned more, adapted his strategy, and grew stronger, until at last he became the strongest warrior in that world. No one could match him. In the world of Mirama, they called him Chonma, the heavenly devil. But now Jun had only one question: how to get home. He had become the strongest. His reward was a surprise trip back to his own reality. He woke up in a hospital but felt completely fine, so he just got dressed and left. The doctors were stunned. Just yesterday, he'd been hit by a truck and needed a 5-hour operation. Jun realized just how much time he had spent in that other world. He barely remembered his old life and knew it would take time to adapt. He glanced at his status window. Every single one of his stats was maxed out. He was this world's strongest hunter now. There was no need to go back to his old job. But the memories of Mirama were terrifying. So much blood was on his hands. He couldn't trust anyone. He'd died and been reborn more times than he could even count. And in that instant, he decided he just wanted to be normal. He wanted to find a job and live an ordinary life. With his mind made up, Jun headed to City Hall, found his floor, and walked into the office. He offered a simple hello. The entire department turned and stared at the door in utter shock. Greg was the first to find his voice, but all he could manage to ask was if Jun was okay. Jun replied that he was totally fine and nothing serious had happened. Greg noticed his voice was different, much more confident than before. After that, he saw that Jun's entire body seemed much stronger. He used to look so fragile, but Greg found himself sizing him up from head to toe. And when he looked at his face, he realized Jun was even a little taller. Jun simply thanked him for the compliments, not letting on that anything had changed. He assured them that even though he looked different, he was still the same old Jun. Then he calmly asked where his desk was. He claimed he was in shock from the accident and had some memory problems. But Greg wasn't buying it. That excuse just made him sound even more suspicious. Olivia, who was smiling the whole time, was sure it was Jun. Just way more handsome. The boss, unconvinced, decided to settle it and brought out a fingerprint scanner. This was the moment of truth. Jun placed his thumb on the scanner while everyone held their breath. In just a second, the scanner confirmed it was indeed Jun. It verified he was an employee of the Rift department. Greg yelled that they needed another test, grabbing Jun's hand and pressing it to the scanner. Once again, it confirmed his identity perfectly. The test ran over and over until the office was tired of hearing the constant beeping. Greg still refused to believe it, saying none of it made any sense. He couldn't understand how a person could change so much in just one day. Olivia, on the other hand, just couldn't take her eyes off of him. She didn't know how his height, build, and voice changed, but she definitely liked this new Jun. Jun was getting a headache from all the chatter about his appearance, so he asked again where his desk was, but no one answered. The boss decided to just send him home to get a good rest. His boss wouldn't listen, insisting he was on sick leave and couldn't come back until tomorrow. Greg put a hand on his shoulder, offering to walk him out, but June said he could manage on his own. So he headed home, but it wasn't that simple since he hadn't been back in a while. It took him a couple of hours just to locate his own house. He took the stairs not knowing his floor, but thankfully he recognized his front door. He found the door, but now came the real challenge. He had to somehow remember the entry code. He tried code after code, hoping muscle memory would kick in, but every attempt failed. He had to pause and really think about it. Surely the code was something familiar to him. He must have entered it thousands of times before. After another failed attempt, a girl's voice suddenly came from inside the apartment. He listened again. Was he so out of it he was hearing things? Then the lock suddenly clicked open. The door opened to reveal a young girl he had never seen before in his life. And for some reason, she was calling him Uncle. He was completely stunned. All he could do was ask who she was. He stepped inside, bracing himself for a strange conversation with the girl in his apartment. June and the girl sat across the table from each other. He tried to look calm, but on the inside his mind was racing with no idea what to do. Taking a sip from his cup, he slowly started to repeat the story she had just told him. Her name was Jill, and she was his brother's girlfriend's daughter. He sighed heavily, saying it again slowly to let the words sink in. Jill just nodded happily. It seemed she thought that because he was talking, everything would be okay. June continued to piece things together out loud. Her mother died in an accident, and with nowhere to go, he agreed to take care of her. That explained how she knew the code and why she was here, which made Jill smile. He then asked if they had actually met at least once before today. The girl suddenly looked flustered and admitted this was their first meeting. He searched for a solution, asking if Jill had any other family members. She hesitated, saying her mother was an orphan, so there was nobody else. June's gaze was suddenly drawn to a plate on the table, and he asked her what it was. Her eyes lit up with renewed hope as she excitedly explained it was omurasa, an omelet with rice, which she had made for him to eat after work. But he abruptly cut her off, telling her he wouldn't be able to take her in. To his shock, the girl erupted in anger, shooting to her feet and shouting that he promised. She shoved her phone in his face, opening up their message history. She showed him the text that proved he'd agreed to it, and now it was his turn to tell his side of the story. He explained that he was in an accident and had only been discharged from the hospital today. And the most important part, he had lost all of his memories. He couldn't remember his own brother, let alone the girl he'd promised to help. When she asked if he was okay, he didn't know what to say since his body was healed. But his mind was a total blank, which made everyday life a challenge. His memory was gone, making even the simplest things difficult. He knew taking on a dependent would be tough, while he was still adapting. Jill froze completely speechless, but inside her mind was racing, trying to salvage the situation. Suddenly, she blurted out that she wanted to make a contract with him. He had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. So he calmly asked her to clarify what kind of agreement she meant. In response, Jill asked him to be her father until she graduated. He instantly regretted asking. Her proposal was just that crazy. She immediately rushed over, grabbed his hand, and started her pitch about his memory loss. Adjusting would be hard, she argued, and she was just the person to help. Clinging to his hand, she promised to handle all the cooking, cleaning, and laundry. In exchange, he would just need to let her live there until she finished school. The deal would last for about 6 months, right until she could move into a dorm. June actually considered it. Her terms were surprisingly good. No, they were very good. He'd spent ages in a medieval world. Adjusting to modern life would be a challenge. Having her around for help and info seemed like a win-win for both of them. He reached into his briefcase. Then he pulled out a pen and some paper. He informed Jill he was ready to draft the agreement. She was totally stunned. She couldn't believe her wild plan was actually working. June sat down quietly at the table and began to write. The scene looked as serious as a multi-million-dollar business deal. He handed her the paper, a list of house rules, and asked her to review it for any issues. The contract clearly outlined deadlines and required Jill to provide all receipts. She also had to manage all expenses and take care of all the housework. June checked one more time if she understood and agreed with all the terms. She quickly replied that everything was perfect. Only one final step remained. He held out the pen to her. With tears welling in her eyes, she accepted the pen. It really looked like she was about to start crying, but this was exactly what she had hoped for. She signed the papers, promising to do her best as a huge smile lit up her face. With that settled, she cautiously asked if she could call him Dad. He agreed and then headed for his room. Jill quickly called out, asking him to just use her first name, and he agreed to that too. Jill hugged the contract, breathing a sigh of relief that he was adjusting so fast. And then it hit her she forgot something important. She quickly went after him. She began talking before even seeing into the room, then stopped cold at the sight of his very toned, shirtless body. Jill gasped, her eyes completely glued to him. He might be her father by contract, but he was a very attractive one. She only managed to look away once Jun pulled on his shirt and faced her. He still looked pretty confused about what had just happened. He simply carried on the conversation, asking what else she needed from him. Sweating a bit, she explained frantically that the fridge was bare. They needed to shop. He played along, asking if that was so, just to keep talking with her, but he had already pulled out his wallet. He produced a card, gave it to her, and said she would be using it now. She turned to him, took the card, and was completely stunned. How could he possibly trust her so quickly? Feeling the pressure, Jill quickly came up with a new plan. Since his memory was gone, he absolutely had to go with her. Perhaps the local market would help him remember something. It sounded like a solid plan. Familiar places could help him. So June agreed to go with her. The store was just on the next street. They arrived in no time, but it wasn't enough for the main character's memory. They made their first stop at a vegetable stand. She told him she would be happy to handle the cooking for a while. But Jun was distracted by a meat sale ad and kept pointing it out. He could only agree. He thanked her and gave her a nod. His answer made her happy. Just then, a strange noise caught their attention. The air grew tense, as if something was about to happen. Confused, he turned to her and asked what was going on. Her expression showed that she already understood everything. In that second, a portal opened before them, and panicked shoppers began to flee. Jill instantly drew a gun from her bag, ready for whatever would emerge. A rift had opened. She didn't know what kind of monster would appear, but she knew one thing. She had to protect June and told him to hide as a huge, fanged green creature emerged. A terrible smell came from its mouth, and it made a strange sound like a growl and moo. Everyone still in the store started running for the exit in a panic. They screamed that a goblin had come to the store, probably for milk. Jun remained frozen in place, simply observing the unfolding chaos. He knew what to do, but had just vowed to himself that he would live a normal life. Jill, however, had made no such promises to anyone. So she aimed her weapon at the goblin and pulled the trigger. A beam of light shot from the gun, its power creating a small gust of wind. The blast hit its target. Jill nailed the goblin right in the chest. The goblin felt the blow, looked down with a confused growl, and saw the huge hole. It crashed to the floor. It seemed its grocery trip was over for good. The store's other patrons slowly began to surround it. Realizing it was gone for good, they all let out a collective, joyful sigh. Luckily for them, a hunter was in the shop and protected them. Leaning on a wall, Jill was breathing heavily still, clutching her gun tightly. Seeing Jun, she quickly composed herself and hid the weapon in her bag. She then started scolding him for just standing there when he was in danger. Jun apologized, vowing to be more careful. That seemed to satisfy her, and she calmed down. The police were already gathered around the goblin. It was a lone monster with no casualties, so they headed for Jill, who had handled it. An officer approached, asking if they had handled the goblin. But his eyes were locked right on Jun. Jun gently guided Jill forward, saying his daughter took care of it. The officer's eyes went wide. A girl barely 14 years old, he could hardly believe it. Shaking it off, he asked for her ID, phone number, and bank details. Apparently, there was a reward for slaying a goblin. It was a bounty for destroying the monster and the rift. The police paid it for keeping the city's residents safe. The officer suggested the reward could be sent to her father's account. Jun thought for a moment, then told Jill to provide her own account info. She gave him a look of complete surprise. He just smiled, saying it was only fair since she did all the work. Blushing with glee, she quickly gave him her number, trying hard not to cheer. And with that, they started for home. Jill was in the middle of making dinner when her phone chimed. She grabbed it, her jaw dropping at the reward amount on the screen. 150,000 won sent from the Seoul police. Jun saw the message too. That was a pretty big payday for just one little goblin. He teased her, asking if she even needed to live with him anymore. She just giggled, explaining that it was a rare, dimensional rift. It was a total fluke, and not all monsters would be that weak. Besides, only licensed hunters are supposed to enter rifts. And right now she was still just a civilian. He cut in, asking if she knew about the law of attraction. Jill looked totally lost. When she asked what he meant, he said our subconscious shapes our reality. Our lives are a reaction to the things we truly desire. In other words, thoughts become things, and this was her wish come true. Understanding his point, she told him she planned to join the Hunter Academy in March. Jill hadn't had her official awakening yet, but she could already use mana. She had a temporary permit for her mana gun, which is why she kept it on her. He complimented her, noting that not everyone had what it takes to be a hunter. It meant she had a special talent sleeping within her. She grinned, telling him he'd better be nice, since she was going to be famous someday. On top of that, she'd already laid out a huge feast for dinner. She ordered him to clean his plate, wishing him a hearty bon appetit. After talking so much about her future, she realized she knew nothing about Jun's job. So she simply came out and asked him. Between big mouthfuls of food, he said he worked at the mayor's office. He was just a normal civil servant. Jill was relieved to hear it, worried his job might have been dangerous. She passed him another serving, wished him well, and then headed off to bed. The exciting day was over. Morning came too fast, and Jun was already at City Hall. He had about 5 minutes to spare before the workday began. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped completely. The whole department was wondering if he'd even show up today. Then the office door swung open. He walked in like it was any other day and said hello. At the sound of his voice, every head in the office turned his way. Greg, not hiding his surprise, asked if he was okay enough to work. It felt like a repeat of yesterday when he was completely absent. He thanked Greg for the concern and assured everyone he was totally fine. The department head tried his best to play it cool. He leaned back, telling June to just let him know if any trouble came up. Then he pointed to an empty desk, finally answering yesterday's big question. That spot right there was his. As he sat, the guy next to him said to ask if June couldn't remember anything. He paused for a moment, unsure of how to respond. He had no clue who this guy was or why he was offering to help him. The friendly stranger seemed to read the confusion on his face, so he quickly introduced himself as Nate. He was June's direct supervisor, with Greg being the boss above them. June thanked Nate for the introduction and for clearing things up. Greg glanced at his watch, pointing out that the workday had started. Yet it seemed like the whole team was still waiting on someone. Nate quickly explained they were waiting for a valuable hunter who needed a briefing. Greg just snorted, "An F rank is considered valuable now." Either way, they were still waiting, and the hunter hadn't arrived yet. Suddenly, the door flew open, followed by the sound of heavy breathing. They all turned to look. A lovely red-haired girl stood in the doorway, her head bowed low. It looked like she was the one they were all expecting. She took a breath, looked up, and asked the obvious, "I'm late, aren't I?" But Greg just waved his hands, insisting it was his fault for not meeting her. Nate pointed them out, suggesting June go say hello to their new hunter. The question was written all over June's face. He didn't seem to get why a hunter was joining their department. The boss grabbed his arm, pulling him along while explaining the situation. Their department finds faults, so they always team up with a hunter on missions. Miss Kate would be taking charge of June and helping him with his work. He said a quick hello, his eyes studying her for a moment. Just then, Nate announced Kate wouldn't be his partner after all. Surprised, they both turned to Nate with questioning looks. Nate looked nervous with a bit of sweat on his forehead. But he continued with his explanation. June isn't in any condition for a mission, so Nate will handle this one. The main character started to get angry. That was supposed to be his job. But Nate stood his ground firmly. He argued it was safer this way, considering the accident's after effects. Greg then jumped in, saying he was also worried about June working normally. June had no idea what was even happening anymore. Were they trying to paint him as some kind of slacker? He calmly insisted this was his job and he would handle it. Nate's panic spiked, pleading for Jun not to push himself. Greg just added to the chaos, yelling about Jun's job troubles. Jun struggled to keep his cool, but an internal volcano was about to erupt on the whole office. With a deep breath, he declared he'd handle his own duties. Nate finally couldn't argue anymore. He knew Jun needed this shot to prove himself, so he folded. The yelling echoed for a bit until everyone finally left for lunch. Outside, Greg and Nate rehashed the whole dramatic scene. One called the mission a crazy risk, the other defended the choice. Jun was part of their team, and regardless of the past, he deserved a real shot since he never made it to his first one. Greg's mind was racing. This decision would have consequences, good or bad. So with a sigh, he finally agreed. And so Jun and Kate headed out on their very first mission. He pored over the instructions while his partner waited patiently. Folding the papers, he felt confident they had all the intel they needed. After reading it a few times, the plan became crystal clear. His job was to analyze the Rift data with support from the Hunter Academy. The moment he finally looked up from the files, a voice piped up from the back. She introduced herself as Kate, age 21. He apologized for the long silence, explaining he had to check the docs. Turning around, his eyes landed on a strange case in her lap. Jun couldn't help but ask what it was. Kate explained it held her uniform and gear for fighting monsters. Just then, the car stopped. The driver announced they had arrived. They thanked the driver and hopped out. June's face was a blank slate as Kate pressed a button on the case. The case clicked open, revealing a strange, greenish sphere inside. She took it out and held it to her chest, leaving June totally confused. Suddenly, the sphere pulsed with color and began to glow brightly. In a flash of light, the sphere enveloped Kate's body, transforming into her suit. He was captivated, unsure what was more amazing, the instant suit-up or her figure. She blushed a little, asking if it was his first time seeing one. June could only give a stunned nod. As they walked, Kate mentioned this was just a low-tier protective suit. Even so, it cost $3 million, and her sword was nothing special. She then paused, asking what she should call him. He said he didn't care, so she suggested manager, since he handled the rifts. Once security gave the all-clear, they were finally allowed to proceed. He just shrugged and agreed to her idea. They followed a stone path and finally saw what they came for. A massive glowing portal, a rift teeming with who knows how many monsters. All of Kate's usual confidence had vanished. She nervously admitted this was her first solo rift dive. Just then, a rough, familiar voice cut in. It was Michael with a couple of hunters they knew. And his main target was clearly Kate. He sneered, saying he thought she'd quit hunting by now. He looked June up and down, asking if Kate joined a guild. Then he leaned in, sarcastically asking if she even knew how to use mana. Kate lowered her head, letting her hair hide her face. She was clearly on edge. Michael, thinking he'd already won, kept piling it on in front of her new colleague. June casually asked if Kate knew this loudmouth. She muttered they'd taken hunter certification courses together. Michael's attention then shifted to June's badge. When he saw he was a contractor for the mayor's office, he howled with laughter. He wiped away tears, amused that no real guild would accept her. Being a contractor just proved she was still a lowly F rank. June cut through the noise, saying, "You know this is pretty pathetic." Stunned, Michael looked to his buddies for support. He jabbed a finger right in the face of Kate's defender. Looking down his nose, he called him an idiot. He grabbed June's collar and hoisted him up as Kate screamed. Michael hissed, "If you've got a problem, city boy, try and stop me." He yelled right in his face, the force of it ruffling June's hair. But June had lost his patience. His eyes narrowed with cold fury, a faint red glow filling them. Michael saw this and froze, his eyes widening, but he didn't let go. That's when a chilling voice echoed in his mind. It said if he let go within 3 seconds, he would be spared. June's eyes blazed a deeper red as the bully slowly lowered him down. Black smoky tendrils began to swirl around Michael's feet. He suddenly couldn't breathe, gasping for air that no one else saw vanish. A friend shook his shoulder, asking if he was all right. The moment he touched him, Michael collapsed. He scrambled backward, shielding his face from nothing. His friends were panicking. It looked like he'd suddenly gone insane. Then a yellow puddle formed right under him in front of everyone. Kate just watched the whole scene completely stunned. She was glad her tormentor got what he deserved, but she had no idea what just happened. June, looking satisfied, grinned and decided to add the finishing touch. He put on a concerned face, offered a hand, and asked if he was okay, but it was obviously all an act. He leaned in close to deliver one last private message. That demonic voice told him to never interfere again if he valued his life. Michael burst into tears, snot bubbles, and all screaming that he agreed. His whole crew just stared in panic. Frozen with uncertainty, Kate hid her face in her hands. June sped past, urging her to move before things got worse. He leaped into the rift they were exploring, but his partner stayed behind. Reaching back through the portal, he finally got her attention. She followed him, and now they were on the other side. Gazing around, this place didn't seem like a monster's den. In fact, it was all beautiful mountains and lush forests. The air was so fresh they both took a deep breath. Off in the distance, a lone goblin wandered through a field. June realized this was an F-rank rift, which explained the peaceful scene. He pulled out his tablet and started entering data on the area. The device confirmed he'd selected an F-rank rift. For a higher rank, he would need to select the exception item. The device began mapping, leaving June with nothing to do for now. He packed his tablet away and strolled toward the goblin. But Kate dashed past him, insisting she should go first. Even as a porter, she felt responsible for a civilian's safety. Plus, a good showing might land her a full-time city hall job. A sudden noise from the side made them both freeze. In a nearby clearing lay the bodies of at least 6 goblins. Standing over them were 3 hunters who had already cleared the area. June was stunned. Other hunters had already been here. Kate collapsed, wailing that she'd lost her chance to prove herself. He tried to calm her, saying they just had to finish the map. June decided to check his partner's stats and opened her window. What he saw totally surprised him. Weren't her stats supposed to be totally average? Then his eyes landed on her skill. It was S-rank fencing. She explained she was thrilled at first since S-rank skills are rare. When she started her courses, she was at the top of her class. But as she spoke, her cheerful mood quickly faded. Chewing a strand of red hair, she said it all went wrong in class. How could she demonstrate the skill with 0 mana? All she could do was try, she screamed in frustration. Mina unlocked at level 3, but she couldn't even reach level 2. Suddenly, June grabbed her elbows and yanked her back with a yell. Something crashed down right where she had been standing. A huge mace thrown with incredible force was stuck in the ground. Looking up, she saw 3 goblins advancing on them. June pulled her up, telling her not to even think about failing. He whispered, "The fight's starting. Get your head in the game." He gave her a small push forward just to get her to take a step. Kate centered herself, took a breath, and focused on the goblins. She charged forward, drawing her sword ready for a fight. She ducked right under a club aimed straight for her head. With a one-handed push, she launched forward, nicking the goblin right on its nose. It clutched its face, but Kate knew a scratch like that wasn't going to be enough. She pushed off again, tucking her leg in, preparing another attack. This time, a powerful heel kick connected squarely with the goblin's head. But the creature remained standing now, looking seriously angry about the whole thing. Its eyes began to glow as it suddenly charged right at her. Kate, however, was completely ready for it. She met the charge head-on and with a single fluid swing took its head clean off. The body crumpled to the floor right next to the other goblin. Panting heavily, she paused, letting it sink in what she'd just accomplished. She turned to her manager beaming and yelled that she'd actually killed a goblin. But looking back, she saw June was still glued to his tablet as another goblin rushed him. With claws and fangs out, it snarled, getting ready to pounce. June, of course, was perfectly aware of the situation. He was considered the best for a reason, after all. He just stood there calmly waiting for the right moment. Just as the goblin reached top speed, he casually took one step to the side. Kate's eyes went wide as the goblin zoomed past the manager. She wasn't sure what to expect, but it definitely wasn't that. The goblin, having expected to tackle someone, went tumbling across the ground. It never occurred to the creature that its target would simply move. After a few rolls, it ended up at the edge of an abyss, where June was waiting. Kate could only stare at him, absolutely stunned. But June remained calmly in place, still looking at his tablet. He had to remind her that the fight wasn't over and to focus on her enemy. But for a moment, neither she nor the goblin cared about each other. They were both just staring at him, totally mesmerized. The goblin recovered first, growling as it swung its club toward her head. At the last second, she managed to raise her sword and block the blow. Their duel went on for about 5 minutes, but they were in a total stalemate. They traded blows again and again, but every attack was parried. She could feel her confidence starting to slip away. She was exhausted and was just about ready to call it quits. June decided to chime in, asking if 2 goblins were really that much trouble. She hesitated, saying she was fine, but that hesitation gave the goblin an opening. It swung low at her legs, but she managed to leap out of the way. The creature pressed its advantage, jabbing its club forward. It was as if the little monster was enjoying watching her mess up. Frustration started to bubble up. Sweat dripped down her face. She was so over this fight. She put on a burst of speed and charged the goblin, swinging her sword, but it easily read her moves and met her with a smack from its club. June was tired of watching this pointless struggle. He sighed heavily and intervened. "Is fencing really your main skill?" He thought the whole point was to block attacks and strike back using minimal effort. He suggested she back off and catch her breath since her sword was shaking from exhaustion. June offered more pointers. He told her to focus. The goblin was at its limit. She glanced at the creature. It was panting hard, its breath steaming. The monster was clearly exhausted. She just needed to watch closely and wait for the perfect opening to strike. The best plan was to channel her strength into one swift, powerful blow, just as the goblin wound up for an attack. June added the key was to exploit the enemy's openings. Kate waited patiently for his signal. And then the moment arrived. It was time to show her swordsmanship. It felt like nothing else existed but her and the goblin. Her eyes were locked on it. The goblin swung its club with all its might, hoping for a final blow. Its club flew right at her, but then something fell off. It froze, watching its weapon slam into the dirt. With Kate's sword at its throat, it was clear she had seized its mistake. With a clean, swift motion, she took its head. The beast gave a final roar as scarlet blood sprayed from its neck. She let out a breath, exhausted from the fight, but she had finally done it. Standing over the goblin's body, she had showcased the grace of fencing. June gave her a compliment. Thanks to her, their rift exploration was a success. They could head back, but Kate just wanted to collapse and rest. He mentioned she'd taken down 17 goblins. Working solo, she could make a killing. Kate shot up, insisting she wasn't in it for the money. She just really wanted to join a team. She figured now was the time to ask why June hid his power. He played dumb about her question and stepped toward the portal. Kate brought up his amazing swordsmanship, recalling how he beat that goblin in one move. But June had already vanished through the portal. She just crossed her arms, frustrated, unaware of just how many secrets her manager was hiding. Evening fell over Seoul, the streets alive with traffic and commuters. June was doing the same, heading home after his first workday. but he had to slow his pace. It felt like he was being followed. He stopped side and instantly knew who it was. He called out to his stalker, promising not to be mad if they appeared in 10 seconds. 10:09, he started, then skipped right to 3 to speed things up. Kate sheepishly appeared from around the corner. Head down, she stood before him, too guilty to speak. June just asked her why she was following him. She was still stuck on the question she'd asked before he'd bolted through the portal. She had to know if he was hiding his strength or if it was all just a fluke. Once again, June dodged the question. Instead, he said, since she followed him all this way, she should at least have dinner. They walked the rest of the way in silence. Kate hesitated on the stairs. Suddenly, she stopped, saying she should probably just go home. Visiting him this late felt a bit awkward. June just asked for a bit more patience. It was dinner time, and she should have cooked already. Her eyes widened. Who was this girl, and why was Kate with him? He simply said that his daughter lived there. Kate expected anything but this. The fact he had a daughter was a total shock. June knocked, whispering to not mention their work. His daughter thinks he's a regular office worker. Kate's mind was racing with questions. Maybe he married young, or he just looked younger than his age. But mostly she felt odd just showing up with him like this. The door swung open and a smiling girl practically flew out. But her smile vanished the second she saw her father wasn't alone. Kate's brain totally short-circuited when she saw his daughter. Why did she look so grown up? He was only 26. Maybe she was his wife who just called him father. This entire situation was just impossible. Jill asked who he'd brought home. A colleague, he replied coolly. Kate stammered a friendly hello, but the girl's expression didn't change. She wasn't letting them in. June seemed to be enjoying this awkward standoff. Finally, he broke the tension and asked if they could come inside. Jill sighed and at last invited them in. Once inside, Kate was amazed. The apartment was sparkling clean. Jill broke the silence with a sweet voice announcing dinner was ready. She suggested his colleague could have some tea and then leave. But this was June's apartment, so they were playing by his rules. He stated plainly that he'd invited Kate for dinner so they'd eat together. The girl made the sourest face, crossed her arms, but had to agree. That's when June decided to poke fun at her behavior. He wondered aloud if she was going through puberty. Jill shot back a loud no, and in that instant it dawned on Kate there was no way she was his daughter. But that just left a bigger mystery. Who was she? Jill pouted and stormed off to get dinner, looking very annoyed. Kate kept staring at her, trying to solve the puzzle as the silence dragged on. After dinner, Kate tried to be polite, praising the soup. Jill flatly replied, "I bought it." Undeterred, the colleague looked for anything else to compliment the girl on. But Jill shot down every single attempt. Tired of the game, Jill finally just turned away from her. But as she did, something caught her attention. It was the shiny hunter's case sitting in their hallway. Kate saw an opportunity and explained it was a transport case from Schwartz's workshop. The moment the words left her mouth, she froze, realizing her huge mistake. Her eyes filled with panic as she looked to June, who was clearing the table. He mentally scrambled for an excuse that Jill would actually believe, but it was too late. Jill was already putting the pieces together. If Kate was a hunter, was her dad really just an ordinary office worker? June jumped in quickly, saying his colleague only did that stuff part-time. Besides, getting caught meant a fine, so this info was best kept secret. Jill suddenly slammed her palm on the table, looming right over Kate. Kate's eyes shot open, her mouth agape. She braced herself, certain she knew what was coming next. But instead, Jill happily grabbed her hands, sharing her own dream of becoming a hunter. She even pulled out her application, shouting that she'd soon join the Hunter Academy, looking at Kate with admiration. Kate felt a bit awkward since she was only an F-rank hunter. That detail didn't matter to Jill, though. She had found her new idol, and the questions began to fly. She wanted to know Kate's fighting style. Close range, long range. Maybe she even used magic or was a healer. The rest of the evening passed in a flash. June barely said a word, and soon they were all outside seeing Kate off. Kate gratefully thanked them for the meal. She confessed it was the most fun she'd had at dinner, hoping they could do it again. However, Jill replied with a smile, asking her not to visit again. Her smile widened as she said she still didn't like Kate. Being a hunter didn't change that. Feeling awkward all over again, Kate began to turn eager to just go home. June stepped in to break up the awkward moment. He calmly sent his daughter inside, saying he would walk his colleague to the subway station. Jill knew better than to argue, so she just smiled and ran back home. The two walked slowly toward the subway through the evening streets of Seoul. As usual, Kate was the one eager to start a conversation. She bluntly stated that Jill wasn't June's biological daughter. June froze, his breath suddenly hitching. He had no idea what to say to that. She confidently listed her reasons. Their ages didn't match, he wore no ring, and there were no family photos. Plus, they had different last names. All the facts led to one conclusion: she wasn't his daughter, and he had never been married. June was just amazed she'd noticed all that while chatting animatedly with Jill. Then she asked the awkward question about his actual relationship with Jill. She wondered if it was anything questionable, and June quickly reassured her. There was nothing strange between them at all. She was his niece. His brother was having some issues, so he was raising her. Kate realized her detective game got ahead of her, and she hadn't considered the implications. She quickly calmed down and apologized for prying. June wasn't bothered. His only request was that she keep it quiet at work. The rest of their walk to the subway was silent, and they arrived soon enough. June said his goodbyes and headed back while Kate watched him walk away. Her inner detective was at it again when suddenly something clicked. How had she missed it June and his brother would share a last name, but his niece had a different one? By the time this thought occurred to her, June had already disappeared around the corner. There were still 5 minutes to go before the workday officially began, but shouting was already echoing through the office. Greg was looking over a folder that June had filled out, stunned, asking how he pulled it off in a single day. But June just had one question: was the report okay? The report was perfect. Data like that usually takes months to gather. There was no way June did this alone. Greg looked at Nate full of doubt. He was sure Nate must have helped his coworker, but Nate just shook his head. He praised June, saying he'd have to work hard to keep up. Pleased with himself, June gave a slight bow and a simple "thank you." Suddenly, Kate popped up, adding her own praise for Nate. He wondered why she was here on her day off, though everyone else seemed happy to see her. Not feeling very talkative, he just plopped down in a chair and told her to do her thing, but warned her no overtime. Still, she insisted, handing him a piece of paper. He glanced at the paper, but had no clue what he was looking at. Nate jumped in, explaining it was the schedule for the hunter qualification exams. Every hunter had to take this exam once a year. A hunter's rank could go up or down. The best was S rank, the lowest F rank. Guilds were scattered all across the world, and every single one was scouting for high-level hunters. This post-exam period was prime time for hunters to switch guilds. Nate leaned in, whispering that the department head dreaded this time of year. Greg worried that if a hunter ranked up, they'd jump ship to another guild, and they'd be stuck recruiting all over again. Regardless, Kate had to take the test, and June might as well go with her. Nate then pointed out she was in the first group, just 1 week away. June turned to Kate bluntly, asking if she'd leave for another guild if she ranked up. She quickly said no, explaining she wanted to extend her city hall contract. June just replied that contract renewals weren't his department. He noted she should focus on raising her rank before the big day, so his assignments would get easier and she'd get a nice pay bump. But she just sighed, certain she was stuck at F rank no matter what. He turned, waiting silently for her to explain that conclusion. The hunter certification process had a few different stages. First, they determined your base level and measured all your stats. Then came the practical hands-on evaluation. Your final score was based on all of it, but mana capacity was the biggest factor. Hunters could boost their physical stats by using a crystal. That's how they absorb mana, but Kate couldn't use them. June realized she had almost no chance of ranking higher than E. Still, he tried to cheer her up, telling her she had to at least try. Otherwise, how would she know her true potential? Besides, if she didn't, he would also be stuck at the F rank level. His words seemed to hit home with Kate. He only managed one hunter, so her rank directly limited the rifts he could enter. Kate's head dropped. She figured if he just found a new hunter, he could finally advance. He played along, suggesting he post an ad for a replacement. Tears welled in her eyes, but then June said she was his only hunter and told her to come with him. After winding through the halls, they finally stepped into a huge room. It was once an office for managing old records. Now it's a training hall for hunters full of dummies and various weapons. June gave one of the walls a firm knock. It was made with special materials from the Hunter Academy. These walls could definitely take a solid hit. Then June brought up Kate's mana issue, asking about physical strengthening. Of course she'd tried, but mana was locked until level 3. Tears welled up as she called herself a total failure. He then asked to see her fencing, so Kate pulled some notes from her bag. She gave him a thick notebook filled with her combat observations. And wow, there were a ton of notes. She detailed fighting styles and how to draw on universal energy sources. Kate mentioned there were sketches of the techniques in the back. He flipped to the last pages, trying to decipher her drawings. She apologized for her drawing, but that wasn't important. He realized her drawings looked like the three-way method. Kate was totally confused. She thought it was just fencing. June explained that fencing was actually based on the three-way method. Ages ago, an imperial scholar and swordsman named Jin existed. He appeared, conquered Murim's martial world, then vanished. A true genius, he reinvented Samya's three-pronged method. Jin called his version fencing, left his teachings, and disappeared. June looked incredibly pleased about this. For once, a genuine smile spread across his face. A spark lit his eyes. He grabbed her shoulders and shook her excitedly. Kate had no idea what was going on. He suddenly declared that she was one of the luckiest people alive. She was flattered by his words, though she had no clue why he said them. Meanwhile, the clock was about to strike 6. Just seconds remained in the workday. Greg watched the clock counting down. The last few seconds dragged on. He'd lost all patience with the slow-ticking clock. 3, 2, 1. The quitting time bell rang, and a huge smile spread across the boss's face. He opened his mouth ready to invite June out. But June was already up saying his goodbyes and heading out. Kate followed his lead, shooting up from her seat and flying out after him. Greg was left completely baffled by this. For days now, those two vanished the second the clock struck 6. Maybe something was up. Nate suspected Kate definitely had a thing for him. They agreed, only a total fool wouldn't see she had a crush on the boss. Greg chuckled. It seemed June was completely oblivious. Meanwhile, June and Kate were downstairs continuing their training. She expertly raised the sword over her shoulder. Jump strike reposition, then pause for a breath before starting again. With one final swing, she came to a halt, resting the blade on her back. Suddenly, a new feeling washed over her. It was a strange energy welling up from within. Together, she and June checked her status window. She'd hit level 3. Now she could finally use mana. He applauded her, amazed she'd done it in just 1 week. Kate gushed that meeting him was the best thing to ever happen to her. Her manager joked that he'd keep that in mind for her contract renewal. Her face was absolutely beaming with happiness. In that one moment, it felt like all her dreams came true. But then she paused, muttering, "Just as I suspected." June was confused until she flat out accused him of hiding his true power. He let out another heavy sigh, so tired of these games. He was just living a normal life, but she kept digging for more. He turned on his heel and said he was heading home. Telling her he'd see her at the Hunter Academy tomorrow, she seemed pleased by that. The next day, they headed to the Hunter Academy, a massive silver building you could see from anywhere in the city. Crowds of hunters were gathered outside, all there for the same evaluation as Kate. This was Kate's second time visiting this place. She had taken her initial hunter exam here, but after passing, she never really pushed her limits. June gave her a pep talk saying her hard work would definitely pay off. All at once, a shout came from the crowd. "It's Gale." Another voice added, "Emily's here too." 2 very imposing hunters strode into the hall. The crowd fell silent before them. The female hunter smiled sweetly, asking to pass. Her male partner was silent, simply glaring at everyone around them. June stared after them, completely baffled. He had no clue who they were or why everyone was acting so starstruck. Kate explained they were from the Icarus Guild, some of the strongest hunters in the world. He just saw a couple of regular hunters who were acting a little too full of themselves. June shrugged, saying they weren't all that special. If she trained hard for a year, Kate could easily be in their shoes. His comment earned a burst of laughter from the nearby crowd, and his partner's eyes went wide with sheer panic. She hid her face blushing and begged him to stop talking. Meanwhile, Gale was clearly tense, annoyed that a routine hunter evaluation had turned into a media circus. With so many cameras around, he had to constantly watch his expression. Emily tried to lighten the mood, noting that this was still better than being on a mission covered in monster guts. Besides, she added, "The rumor is a true genius will show up this year." He scoffed. He heard that same old story every single year, and it never came true. Emily suddenly darted forward. She couldn't let another guild poach a top talent. Gale followed her at a slower pace. They couldn't afford to lose out. Some of Kate's old acquaintances were watching them from a distance. Michael rubbed his chin, saying everyone just had to watch him perform. A fire of confidence burned in his eyes. He was so ready for this, aiming for that coveted guild invitation. But after recent events, his partners weren't quite so sure about him, and just in case, they checked if he'd brought a spare pair of pants. A friendly young man in a blue suit walked into the common room and announced it was time for stats, asking the hunters to form a line. June finally suggested that Kate should go on ahead. He was really getting tired of this whole waiting game. The hunters lined up, and you could hear whispers about who would make it into the Icarus Guild. All they could see ahead was a sea of people and the golden light from the huge gates. The next hunter stepped up to the evaluation device to begin his test. The machine displayed his stats showing a C rank, and the people around him started cheering. In that very moment, the hunter was swarmed by guild managers, who immediately started offering him jobs. Some offered free weapons, others a free suit, and a few promised double the deposit. Kate had to struggle a bit to push through the crowd to the appraiser. 30 minutes later, she finally came back to June, head down and breathing hard. Getting through that crowd of hunters was a real challenge. But then she looked up at him with a happy smile and announced she got D rank with strength, 6, agility, 11, power 8, and mana 10. She was happiest about her mana stat, having raised it from 0 in just 1 week. He was thrilled for her internally, but on the outside, he just gave her a quiet congratulations. Now it was time for the practical exam where they'd have to show off their actual skills. From the arena's top floor, they watched a C-rank hunter take on the Rift Challenge. June told Kate to get ready, saying that she was going up next. She hesitated, asking again if she should really attempt a C-rank Rift, since she had only just made D rank. He answered with a confident yes, adding that he was perfectly capable of handling a rift of this level. The girl was nervous, not understanding where his confidence was coming from. June simply asked her to trust him and just try. The speakers called for the third group for the C-rank rift. Kate took a shaky breath, trying to leave her nerves behind, and took a determined step forward. But as soon as she entered the arena, she saw how many people were watching her, and all her nervousness came rushing back. A familiar voice called her name from behind, and a look of pure horror crossed her face. It was Michael, and he looked baffled, asking what on earth she was doing there. She just stammered, and he began to mock her with a sarcastic smirk. He stepped closer, looming over her, while repeating his question again and again. Then all of a sudden he started yelling right at her. He just couldn't believe she actually thought she was strong enough. He screamed furiously that she must be out of her mind. Tears welled in her eyes. She flinched and began to apologize to him. Michael grabbed his head. He'd never seen a low-rank hunter even attempt a C-rank rift before. The other hunters in their test group turned around, unable to believe what they were hearing. An F-rank hunter was right there in the arena with them. They noticed she was wearing some seriously basic gear. She started to doubt herself, feeling like an ant in this massive arena. Michael just stood there, completely stunned. He couldn't figure out her plan, giving her a look of disdain. Then his eyes widened in terror. He frantically spun around, checking if that scary guy from last time was anywhere near her. From above, Jun watched the whole scene. He really couldn't stand Michael and his empty bragging. Just then, someone else entered the viewing room. It was Gale, the famous hunter from the Icarus Guild everyone admired. He casually brought up Jun's job at the mayor's office and the young hunter under his wing, Kate. Jun wasn't surprised by the intel, but he wondered where this conversation was heading. Gale slowly closed the distance between them, ready to get to the point. He announced the Icarus Guild wanted to formally invite Kate to join them. She'd never even received proper physical enhancement. For an F-rank hunter to boost her mana this much was unheard of. Using an F-crystal, her stats had only reached 10. He also noted the lack of any enhancement records after that point. She was a prodigy with monstrous talent. Jun remained silent. He carefully weighed his next words, knowing anything could be used against him. Gale went on, promising that the Icarus Guild would give her wings to fly. She'd gain incredible experience and knowledge raiding the most difficult rifts. He looked Jun dead in the eye, asking what he could possibly offer to compete. Jun lowered his gaze for a moment. What did he have to offer her other than a salary bump? Gale kept up the pressure, mentioning she was still very new to this. So why did Jun send her to a C-rank rift when she'd never cleared anything above D rank? He tried to read Jun's expression. Did he honestly think she could handle it? Down below, an alarm blared through the speakers. The rift was now active. The test had begun as the massive gates started to rise. An announcer declared they had to destroy the orc warriors within the time limit. Huge green monsters with glowing red eyes and massive fangs charged toward them. It's finally starting, Michael shouted with glee, drawing his weapon. Kate, already armed, stood her ground, calmly assessing her opponents. But up in the observation room, a different battle was taking place. Gale argued that only a real hunter can train another, telling Jun to let her go. He leaned in closer, probing to see what Jun was really thinking. Was she just an important asset, or did he want to keep her by his side? Jun scratched his neck, trying to sort through the whole conversation. At last he looked up and said, "She's not a thing, so I have no right to decide for her," he finished with a sly grin. Then he proposed a friendly wager to Gale. Gale listened closely, a curious look on his face, as he waited for the details. Meanwhile, in the arena, the fight was getting intense. The orcs stampeded toward the hunters. Michael yelled at Kate to get her head in the game. There was no more time to think. With fearsome growls, the orcs charged forward. Michael instantly regretted picking a C-rank quest. He froze as the huge green monster closed in. A mighty crash rang out as metal met metal. Just in time, Michael raised his weapon to block. He struggled to hold back an orc easily, twice his size. The orc's hammer blows drove Michael backwards step by step. He was at his limit. His strength failed, and his weapon dropped. Instantly, the orc's fist connected squarely with his jaw. The blow sent him flying several meters back as the monster let out a satisfied roar. Not only was he sent flying, but his hammer went soaring too. Completely defenseless, he watched the club rise for the final blow. He actually asked the monster to wait, looking completely ridiculous. But in that instant, Kate slammed into the orc's side, grabbing its attention. She misjudged its power and stumbled, but the beast barely flinched. Michael could only stare, completely stunned. Was he just saved by the very girl he'd always teased? To completely shatter his pride, she ordered him to stand back and let her handle it. He couldn't understand. What was she thinking? How could she possibly fight that orc? But the orc didn't care who its opponent was. With a mighty roar, it swung its club. It swung with deadly accuracy, but Kate dodged just in time. That single exchange gave her all the information she needed. Observing its moves, she saw its attack pattern clearly. A confident smile appeared on her face. She had a plan. Just as the orc wound up for a strike, she zipped behind it. A few sharp hits later, the monster finally realized its mistake. As it turned to find her, she landed another surprise attack. The orc's eyes went wide with confusion. It had no idea what to do as Kate readied her next move. She flipped right over it, gripping her sword for a calculated strike. Her final attack landed squarely on its back. A fatal blow. Pleased with both her victory and her swordsmanship, she struck a triumphant pose. Everyone watching, both inside the arena and out, was stunned, silent. Anyone who had doubted her was now eating their words. But no one felt worse than Michael, her bully, who she had just saved. June gave a satisfied nod. He knew she was up to the challenge. Gale yelled that it was impossible. Just last week, she was the lowest-ranked hunter. With a smirk, June turned and asked why he looked so shocked. He slowly explained that there are 3 ways to use mana. The first is embedding it in a weapon. The second method involves releasing mana outward. And the third is the mana substitution technique. Embedding mana is easy enough, but she just used the first and second techniques simultaneously. And she handled it like a pro. The speaker announced the exam was over, asking everyone to leave. The other hunters celebrated with each other. But Michael was completely frozen, wondering how any of this was possible. He looked at the scoreboard to see his name at the bottom with a score of 0. Kate flew out of the exam room, rushing to thank June. But on her way, she was stopped by the admirable hunter from before. He smiled and complimented her on a well-fought battle. She got flustered, mumbling that for an S-rank hunter like him, it was probably simple. Gale noted her impressive sword skills and asked if she had a teacher. June stepped in, coolly informing him that Kate was self-taught. She panicked a little, looking between Gale and her teacher, who was clearly fibbing. Realizing June had a reason, she just giggled and confirmed his story. Gale interrupted, addressing her directly by her name. He got straight to the point and invited her to join the Icarus Guild. If she were to agree, they would provide her with everything. He promised to give her anything she wanted, but she cut him off. She thanked him for the offer, but said she would not be joining his guild. Smiling, she turned back to June. She couldn't just leave her teacher. Gale was shocked, urging her to reconsider such a rare opportunity. The salary would be several times higher than at City Hall, plus she could grow. Kate simply apologized again, saying she was happy right where she was. The conversation was clearly over. They turned and walked off together, leaving the stunned hunter behind. June glanced back, reminding Gale not to forget to call him. Gale's mind was racing at a mile a minute. He had no idea why he was supposed to call him. Then it hit him. The bet they had made right before Kate's fight. Before it started, June declared his student could beat more than 5 orcs. If June lost, he'd convince Kate to join the guild. If he won, Gale owed him a Class A suit. At that moment, the bet had seemed completely ridiculous. He was sure he'd win, so he'd agreed. The next day, the office was buzzing from the moment it opened. Kate shyly took out her new C-rank hunter card. Greg and Nate showered her with praise for jumping from F-rank to C-rank. Nate pulled out his phone and asked if she had seen the news. An article had already been published about her. He read the headline, which announced that the Icarus Guild had been rejected. A girl with such amazing talent. Who exactly was she? Nate was baffled since Icarus was the very best guild. Greg nudged him, reminding him that they worked for one of the best city halls. But he just kept on saying if he'd gotten that offer, he would have accepted. Greg couldn't understand the complaint. The hunter every guild wanted was right here with them. Kate went to June and asked if he would treat her even better now. He smiled and nodded, promising she wouldn't regret her choice to stay. She beamed at his response since that was everything she wanted to hear. Greg couldn't help but watch them making a little heart shape with his fingers. June announced he and Kate were headed to Dean's workshop, the biggest hunting equipment store in the city. Nate tried to pump the brakes, reminding them of their budget. Every last penny had a purpose, and this would mean digging for extra funds. June just smiled, saying they were only picking up what was promised. And just like that, they arrived at the workshop, completely blown away by the size of the place. They walked on until Kate started to get tired. When June finally came to a stop, she realized they were in the most expensive part of the whole workshop. They were approached by the store manager. June explained he was from the Rift Affairs department sent by a hunter named Gale. The manager understood immediately, nodding and welcoming them inside. She told them to take their time and let her know if they needed anything. The very first thing that grabbed their attention was a golden suit with a dragon outline, but it felt a little too flashy. Then they saw a silver one with red highlights, but Kate said nothing felt quite right for her yet. She turned away from one display to check out the next. But then something made her pause. It was a stunning red suit with tall black boots and, most importantly, brilliant white wings that seemed to flutter. Kate leaned against the glass display, totally captivated. She knew instantly that this suit was top tier, made from the wings of a queen ant. June gave her a knowing look, asking if that was the one. Her eyes were absolutely sparkling. She had to have this suit. Her heart was pounding, but she just sighed and said it was probably too expensive. 4 hours later, an exhausted June was ready to collapse. He couldn't understand why they'd spent so long there only to choose the winged suit in the end. A beaming Kate didn't even notice him. She was too busy admiring the suit's gorgeous case. June's gaze fell on a weapons crate with a sign that read, 50% off everything inside. He paused, asking why these items were on sale, and the seller replied that they were just E-rank items, but he added that you could sometimes find something good in there. The merchant said if they bought a few things, he'd even give them a bigger discount. Each item was 1,000,000 won. June was floored. How could they call that a discount when the price was still so high? Kate tried to tell him that all hunting gear was this expensive, but he had already turned to leave. He wasn't interested in those discounts. Suddenly, something stopped him cold. A flash of light from behind him made him realize what was in that bin. He dove into the container like a hawk, frantically digging through the pile. Kate watched in stunned silence, having no idea what just came over him. And then, June found what he was looking for and froze. In the basket lay a carved sword hilt, glowing with a soft red light. How in the world did this end up here? The sword of Chonma, his old sword, from when he ruled the world of Murim. He looked at the price, 50,000 won. The seller immediately started to apologize. He spotted a strange hilt lying there and reached for it instantly. Jun clutched it protectively, refusing to let go. He casually asked if this was really only 50,000 won. The shop owner kept apologizing, saying this was unusual. Jun cut him off, saying he'd buy the sword. The seller looked completely baffled. It was just a rusted piece of iron. Only the hilt remained, but our hero didn't mind. He paid without another word. Leaving the shop, he headed to Mount Ohm, far from any curious onlookers. He gripped the ancient hilt he'd just bought. He couldn't believe it. The sword of the strongest warrior for just 50,000 won. He gave it a swing. The hilt glowed with a purple light, and a dark, shadowy energy erupted from it. A gust of wind swirled around him. He gave it another swing, then recalled his daughter. She would be waiting for him at home. Dinner was probably already on the table. Our hero pulled out his phone and checked the time. The subway would take way too long. He kicked off the ground and took off. Running was much faster. In a flash, he was home. He opened the door, calling out an apology for being late, but no one came to greet him. The TV was on. A news report mentioned a huge rift that briefly appeared near Mount Ohm, but Jun wasn't paying any attention. He peeked into Jill's room, wondering why she hadn't come out. Jill was hunched over a stack of papers, reading them intently. With the move, she'd forgotten about all the fees, equipment lectures, maintenance, and more. She couldn't believe how expensive it all was. It was supposed to be a public university after all. The grand total was over 50,000,000 won. Jill considered telling her dad, but that wasn't part of their agreement. She was grateful he let her stay, but she was too embarrassed to ask for tuition money. Just then, her thoughts were broken by June entering her room. She jumped, startled that she hadn't heard him come home. Panicked, she tried to hide the papers, but he didn't seem to notice them. He just came by to ask her to dinner. She appreciated the thought, but said she wasn't hungry, telling him to eat without her. He stood in the doorway watching the odd scene. Jill was stacking pencils into little houses on top of the papers she'd been studying. Our hero knew something was up, and an idea popped into his head. He went to the kitchen and yelled, "Hey, where's the sesame oil?" Jill was confused. Dinner was already cooked, so why would he need sesame oil now? She rushed to the kitchen to help him before he made a mess of things. With the girl distracted, he silently slipped into her room. He grabbed the papers and saw it right away. They were all bills. His eyes scanned the page, adding up the numbers. 50,000,000 won. He didn't have that kind of cash. A wave of panic washed over him. Later that night, he couldn't sleep, just lying in bed with his mind racing. Suddenly, a dreadful new thought hit him. If the entrance fees alone were this high, what would 3 full years of tuition cost? He grabbed his phone, opened his banking app, and saw just over 800,000 won. June needed advice, so he hit Kate's number. Then it hit him it was way too late to be calling, but Kate answered anyway, her voice full of concern. He decided to deflect, joking about her being a night owl. In reality, Kate was fast asleep. But a call from June, she just had to pick up. Getting straight to it, he asked about the price of an A-rank mana crystal. And her answer made his eyes go wide. A single crystal was worth 100 to 200 million. Kate just laughed, thanking him. She reminded him she was C rank worlds away from A rank. He didn't quite get it, but thanked her and hung up. But a brilliant idea was already forming. The night passed in a flash. June got some rest, with a big plan for the morning. He threw on a hoodie, packing glasses, and a mask. He needed total anonymity, grabbing gloves and a fake hunter pass. Jill's note said she was out exercising. He had a 3-hour window. Our hero headed to Mount wrong side of a newly opened rift. He geared up, pulling on his disguise. With an easy leap, he cleared the fences and warning signs. Then he zipped straight toward the rift's location. June eyed the rift, then swiped his fake pass on the entry machine. It was an A-rank rift, a warning-chimed rank mismatch. But he wasn't worried about the warning. After all, he was a top-tier hunter. Identity confirmed. He stepped into a forest that looked just like Mount Wong. The plan was simple: smash a few monsters, grab their magic stones, and head home. It was his day off after all. But then, the snap of a branch, someone else was in here. It was a party of 3 hunters here to clear the rift. They were shocked to find someone else inside. June sighed. This just got way more complicated. The female hunter called him insane for being in an A-rank rift, and without any gear. They figured he was some kind of streamer. Such types often showed up. One guy approached June, told to be nice, and just sent him home. He walked over, introducing himself as Alan from the Me Guild. June said nothing. The silence made Alan nervous. Was this guy even a hunter? His getup was a death wish. June thanked him for caring. He said he'd just kill a couple monsters and be on his way. Then he tried to leave, which really set the other hunters off. Suddenly, the ground started shaking violently like an earthquake. Even June was completely confused. He simply waited, then a glitch in the rift revealed the Ogre King. The only way out was to defeat the boss or for every hunter to perish. Alan yelled for his partner to hit the emergency recording button right now. Meanwhile, Hunter Academy President Adrian Shaw felt a knot in his stomach. A sudden glitch in a rift was the cause of his concern. His assistant reported 3 Me Guild hunters were inside plus 1 F rank. Adrian's expression hardened. An F rank with them, the assistant added the emergency feed, had no audio. But the footage showed the hunters were already tracking the monster. Those My Guild members were some of the top A-rank hunters around, and with their gear they actually had a decent shot at this. Adrian then asked the critical question, what kind of boss was it? The answer came back, an Ogre King. The president paled. They were likely goners. He told his team to head to the negotiation room. Inside the rift, the hunters were moving with urgency. Alan told Mira to use Hawkeye and find the monsters. She was their top long-range expert. William was the best healer he'd ever worked with, and as for Alan himself, he'd never once lost. Looking at his team, he knew they had a shot to win if Lady Luck was on their side. His train of thought was broken by Jun, who casually mentioned he was heading a different way. Alan sharply told him to zip it and stick close. One more stupid comment, and he'd end him personally. William quickly apologized to Jun. Alan's a good guy, he's just really stressed right now. Mira couldn't help but wonder if they'd make it out of this alive. After all, an Ogre King was tough even for S-rank hunters. Suddenly, Alan threw up a hand, signaling for everyone to stop the chatter. Up ahead stood a single dark ogre. They had to take it down and keep moving. He asked Mira to scan for any other nearby threats. Her eyes began to glow a brilliant yellow. It was like a computer in her head was analyzing the entire area. Alan ordered Mira and William to cover his back. He'd handle the front. Then he turned to Jun and said, "Don't do anything weird. Just stay put." Just as they moved to engage, Mira suddenly yelled for them to stop. The guy shot her a questioning look. Her reply, something felt very wrong. For some reason, all the ogres were marching in a single direction, and she couldn't figure out why. Then it hit her why the monsters were moving like robots on a fixed path. They were all converging on the Ogre King, who had to be close. Jun realized then, even with 3 S-rank hunters, this fight was going to be tough. Over 20 monsters were already swarming around their king, and more were still arriving. Jun sized up his temporary teammates. He knew with their skills they wouldn't last long like this. So he decided it was time to act. With a heavy sigh, he started walking toward the ogres. Alan lunged, grabbing his jacket to pull him back. Alan told him to stay put and keep his head down, but June just mumbled back. Alan yelled that if June messed this up, he'd strangle him before the ogre got a chance. But June pleaded, asking him to just hear him out. The hunter was fuming. His voice dropped to a harsh whisper, telling him to shut it or else. So June flopped down in the bushes and finally agreed with him. He told the group to just do their thing. Alan knew they couldn't wait, not with all the ogres gathering in one spot. They had to pick them off one by one using Mira's sharpshooting skills. And so the fight began as they circled a monster easily twice their size. Alan swung his massive sword, preparing a powerful strike. But suddenly his face twisted in horror. This was not how he expected the fight to start. The dark ogre caught the blade mid-swing, holding it easily in its huge hand. Just then, Mira created a diversion, firing a volley of arrows right into its back. She stood confidently with her bow while a nervous William trembled beside her. Covered in explosive arrows, the monster turned to face them. William finally jumped into the fight, firing his laser pistol. He kept drawing the ogre's attention his way. The huge beast was closing in, so he urged Alan to hurry. Alan told him to quit showing off and raised his giant sword for the strike. With one powerful swing, he sliced the ogre's legs right out from under it. The monster shrieked in pain, its eyes turning blood red with fury. This was the perfect chance for a finishing blow, and Alan wasn't about to miss it. He drove his sword deep into its back. Black blood sprayed from the wound. The ogre was done for, one giant down. He took a deep breath and asked Mira where the next target was. She said the next one was close by. Alan insisted they move now so they wouldn't waste any time. Suddenly, William cut in, staring at the bushes where June was supposed to be. But of course, June was gone. He'd wandered off, which meant finding that goofball. Nearby, a crazy light show erupted. Beams of light were flashing in every direction. And the person responsible for this disco, it was June. When the light faded, he stood in a field of defeated ogres. He grabbed a random twig and started poking the ogres looking for their crystals. June pulled another blue stone from a monster, pretty happy with himself. He tossed it in his bag, deciding he'd gathered enough for now. But he couldn't go back yet. The rift's exit was on a timer. He still had to defeat the Ogre King and fast. Then he remembered Alan's promise to kill him if he disobeyed. So he decided to rest and let the others sweat it out a bit on the battlefield. Meanwhile, Alan was on top of another ogre trying to slice its throat. Mira let loose a dozen arrows straight into its face. Finally, the beast crashed to the ground, taking Alan right down with it. William slumped to the ground, completely exhausted. Alan collapsed on the defeated monster as the huntress admitted these foes were tough. But one question remained: why were all these monsters gathering in one place? They'd only beaten 11 of them and their stamina was already gone. They'd only won by a fluke. Just then, William's terrified voice called out from behind. The hunter turned around and immediately understood the source of that fear. An entire army of monsters stood before them, led by the Ogre King himself. The king's face was a mask of pure shock and rage. How did they all get here so fast? There was no time to prepare. They had to fight as they were. Alan ordered his team to get it together. His plan was to retreat, slowly picking them off one by one. He started to explain the next step, but his voice trailed off. It was hopeless. This really felt like the end of the line. This was where they would fall, and then a sudden explosion. The ogres charged, and their first strike sent William flying into a tree. The Ogre King let out a guttural roar, signaling his warriors to attack. A wall of ogres began to close in on Mira and Alan. Mira thought that this morning's breakfast might have been her last. The captain stepped before her, telling her to grab William and run, while he created a distraction. But she was too exhausted to even move a muscle. He yelled the order again, his voice leaving no room for argument. And with that, he charged headfirst into battle, his long sword leading the way. Even the ogres seemed stunned by his courage, one man against a whole army. But then out of nowhere, blinding beams of light sliced through the air, severing ogre limbs. Alan stared in shock. None of them possessed a skill like that. Mira, who now had William on her shoulder, was equally stunned. They'd never seen anything like it. That's when Jun landed, shielding Alan from the battle. The captain could only ask what in the world was going on. Jun was silent, assessing the field. Then green energy formed a dome around the hunters. He told them simply to stay inside the barrier. It was a powerful protective shield. But who among them could create a defensive field of that immense size? An ogre loomed over Jun, its massive club aimed right for his head. As if mocking it, Jun casually pointed a small stick at the beast. He flicked the twig forward, and the ogre's body instantly exploded into pieces. William finally regained consciousness, trying to make sense of the chaos. Mira's jaw dropped. The ogre had just burst. The Ogre King, however, wasn't about to give up so easily. Jun had only taken out one monster. A huge army still remained. Jun drew his sword, figuring he might as well finish the job now that he was here. He faced the army calmly, casually tossing his sword's hilt as if it were a toy. Then he launched the hilt high into the air, and the blade finally emerged, in the exact spot where the sword had just been. The sky cracked with the deafening sound of thunder. Then lightning tore across the sky. The ground began to shake. Alan had no idea where this strange thunder was coming from. William doubled over sick from his wounds. Mira knew this wasn't normal thunder. A splitting headache rocked him. Alan squeezed his eyes shut. The thunder grew deafening. Even his eyes began to throb. The vibrations made it difficult just to stay on his feet. But Jun was unfazed. He stood firm, guiding his power with a flick of his wrist. Beams of light once again sliced across the field, tearing through the monsters. With every move, this F-rank hunter became more unbelievable. Where in the world did he learn this sword style? The light beams converged on the Ogre King. With his army gone, all that power was focused solely on him. A pathetic scream escaped its lips. It was a complete defeat. Jun recalled the hilt catching it with practiced ease. He'd beaten an ogre army and its king without moving an inch. A system alert announced the rift was stabilizing. Finally, they could all go home. Alan struggled up, wondering if this was real or just a dream. He rushed over to Jun, asking how he'd done any of that. Jun simply offered them the credit for the Ogre King kill. As he packed the crystals, he explained it would boost their reputation. It would also raise their value as hunters. Alan just couldn't process it. He wiped out a boss and was giving them the credit. Jun said it was their call, but they did owe him for the save. He added that these lesser crystals were enough for him. He gave a quick goodbye, and in a flash he was gone. The hunters just stared, totally confused as to why he left. Alan sighed that they should have gotten his business card, to which Mira said a guy like that probably wouldn't return. At the academy, the staff watched the monitors in stunned silence. 2 employees stared at the screen, unable to process what they saw. President Adrian ordered them to replay it from the ogre's appearance. Once again, they watched the footage. They saw the army appear and Alan telling his team to run. Then came Jun's command to stay inside the dome. Adrian paused the video, focusing on Jun's image. He was casually tossing what looked like a sword up and down, but when they zoomed in, they saw it wasn't a sword, just a hilt. After that came the screams about thunder and splitting headaches. An employee reported all cameras cut out at that moment. Adrian asked for his name. The staffer replied his name was Kim. The president's unease grew as he pressed for more information. His team said they couldn't find anything on the mystery hunter. His registration number and his address were both fake. In fact, all of his information was completely fake. Even his birth date was wild day, 99 month, 99 year, 9,999. With more hunters on site, he asked if anyone saw the guy appear from the rift. He pressed his temple hoping for a clue, but his mind drew a blank. Skill-wise, he was easily S rank level. He could channel his mana directly into a sword. That protective barrier had to be a unique skill. The president was certain no other hunter had that kind of technical style. He was sure this mystery man would surface soon. Meanwhile, Jun was already home. He made it back just 10 minutes before Jill arrived, and the lock clicked shut. Playing it cool, he casually asked where she had been. She walked into the kitchen, setting her heavy bags on the table. She mentioned stopping for groceries after her workout. Turning to him, she asked if he had eaten lunch yet. Jun said he wasn't hungry and decided to clean his room instead. He walked into his room, flopped on the bed with a sigh, and declared it clean enough. He'd been on the go since morning and was completely exhausted. Suddenly, he sat up straight and reached over to his nightstand. He opened the box holding the magic stones from today's haul. It occurred to Jun that the workshop might get suspicious about that stone. He remembered the appraiser saying it was worth 250 million after fees. And that was just for one single tiny stone. He hoped everything would turn out okay. He expected way less for one, so he had no clue what to do with the other 9. But his head was pounding. Too drained to think, he just tossed the crystals into the air. The stones scattered on the bed as he flopped down, totally spread-eagled. He definitely needed some rest. The day had just vanished. He slept deeply, recovering his energy, and woke up just in time for dinner, completely unsuspecting. Jill said she'd made plenty of food but could cook more. Jun passed her the documents and bills that had been stressing her out. Her face fell as she looked down, then she asked the dreaded question. Had he actually gone through them? But he was focused on just one thing. Why didn't you tell me? Jill thought he would be furious. Grateful for a place to stay, she didn't want to burden him with a 50 million bill. In response, Jun just crossed his arms. Yeah, this is a huge problem. Our contract doesn't cover this at all. So they would need to add a new clause right away. Jill's eyes went wide. What in the world was he talking about? Jun already had the contract out, adding a line that he would cover all her education costs. He pushed the paper to her, saying he would wait for her signature. I'm getting hungry, so you should sign it quickly. She stared at the document, her eyes blurring with tears in total disbelief. Looking rather pleased, he repeated, Dad's hungry, so sign it already. Tears streamed down her face as she thanked him between her sobs. Jun just quietly handed her a pack of tissues. He teased that his daughter was getting quite expensive. It took them half the night to curb Jill's endless thank yous. Soon a new morning arrived, and it was time for work. Things felt normal again as he slipped on his coat to leave. He announced his departure, but Jill made him wait, rushing over to fix his crooked tie. Then she gave him a bag with a lunch she had prepared for his workday. A bit surprised, he looked inside, thanked her, and said he really had to leave. Her face completely lit up. She agreed with him and wished her dad a wonderful day. He stepped out into the hallway. The door shut, the lock clicked, but he just stood there. Jun was stunned. So this was the power of 50 million. The office was quiet. Nate was there alone listening to the news. He was just thinking how the Me Guild had been gaining so much fame recently. The door swung open and Jun walked in with a cheerful good morning. He asked if he'd seen the news about 3 A-rank hunters taking down a major rift boss. It was a loaded question. Nate got flustered, mumbled a bit, and claimed he knew nothing. Nate figured the rift was A-rank, so the boss inside must have been S-rank. How could just 3 hunters manage that? It sounded impossible. An F-rank hunter was reportedly there too. Perhaps he was the real key. He asked Jun if he thought the news was leaving something out. Jun didn't think so, saying the Me Guild always seemed like a trustworthy group. Nate had to agree. That particular guild had a spotless, scandal-free record. But then he paused, wondering if he'd even mentioned the Me Guild to Jun. Shaking off the thought, he suggested Jun start studying up on high-level rifts. His hunter was leveling up so fast, they'd be able to take on those missions soon. He then recalled that their department had never managed anyone above B rank. So he honestly had no idea how to prepare for such a mission. He handed him a file folder. It was intel on a new rift that just opened up in a small province. Nate had briefly scouted it on his last trip and confirmed it was full of orcs. It's a presumed C-rank rift, and since Kate is also a C, it's a good match for them. He quickly added that it was an official order from the department head, so no hard feelings. But Jun wasn't offended at all. He was pleased, taking it as a sign of trust. Nate complimented him, noting Jun's excellent performance at work lately. He also offered his full support if Jun ran into any problems. Jun politely expressed his gratitude. At that moment, the red-haired whirlwind, Kate burst into the office apologizing for her tardiness. Nate tried to calm her, reminding her that on normal days she could have stayed home. That was simply the department's policy. Out of nowhere, Greg appeared at Kate's side, chiding Nate for not properly greeting a star employee. Nate obediently gave Kate a proper greeting, telling her to drop by the office anytime. Amused by the entire situation, Kate just laughed and thanked him. Amidst the friendly office chaos, Jun quietly put his coat back on. He grabbed the file Nate had passed to him, and he asked if he and Kate could clear the rift that very day. As Nate mentioned reporting to his superiors, Greg quickly ordered them to go. Behind him, Kate did a little victory dance. They were almost out the door when the boss's voice stopped them cold. He gave Jun $150,000, telling him to treat the huntress well. The weather outside was absolutely perfect. Jun and Kate decided to have lunch right there near the rift area. As they left, Kate thanked him for lunch, but he said the credit was all hers. Jun mentioned that since her C-rank promotion, the mayor's office treated her differently. Kate hadn't even realized it. She thought Greg might be rewarding Jun's success, but that didn't feel right. $150,000 was a lot for the boss. He was clearly trying to impress her. Jun, however, thought to himself that the amount was just a drop in the bucket. With $200 million in the bank, he pushed the thought aside and told Kate it was time to go. The rift was just a short walk away. After a couple of turns, they saw it shimmering right in the middle of a street. Kate was surprised to see so many other hunters gathered around. Apparently, word about this particular rift had spread pretty quickly. Near the entrance stood an academy official and a surprising number of B-rank hunters. Jun wondered why B-rank hunters were there since the rift was below their level. She explained it was common practice to clear lower-level rifts for safety. Kate went quiet, carefully watching the activity near the rift's entrance. Jun noticed and asked if she was feeling nervous. The girl gave a worried laugh, admitting she was, as this was her first C-rank rift. Her mind then flashed back to the events of their very first rift. She had to protect the manager back then, and couldn't afford any more mistakes. As if reading her thoughts, Jun told her not to worry about him as he wasn't helpless. She puffed her cheeks and muttered that if he was in danger, he had better just run. But our hero simply assured her that wouldn't be necessary. Her abilities had been confirmed well before her official certification after all. He reminded her how she easily defeated that orc. As long as she was careful, she'd be fine. Jun was totally confident in her and just wanted her to believe in herself. Kate was a little embarrassed, but she had to agree with him. He looked toward the rift and saw hunters already forming their parties. That reminded him of the hunters he'd teamed up with just yesterday. They were a capable team, but they all had terrible attitudes, acting superior to everyone. Kate's voice suddenly pulled him out of his memories. She had already changed into her new scarlet suit, complete with little wings. Jun stared at her, taking in the whole new look. She started fidgeting nervously and asked him if the suit looked okay. He slowly said her name. Sweat beaded on her face as she tried to read his reaction. Then he completely changed the subject, asking what kind of partners she'd want. What type did she prefer? A tank to draw monster aggro or long-range support. Her lips slowly tightened into a very displeased frown. Was he really not going to comment on her new outfit at all? He finally snapped out of his trance and gave her his full attention. Jun was confused, but she started yelling that he'd promised he only had her Or maybe that was a lie. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. She then asked if he planned to sign another hunter. June tried to explain that even if he did sign someone else, it wouldn't mean her own contract was being terminated. At that, her face darkened, and she insisted she didn't need anyone else. She spun around with a huff and marched right for the rift. She told him to hurry up, saying they had a job to do. At the rift was an intern from the Hunter Academy's control department. He was currently busy digging for gold deep inside his nose. Flicking away his prize, he noticed that something here was off. It had been 2 days since the rift first appeared, but the hunters who recently entered hadn't come back out. The first team that went in returned after 8 hours, no problem, but the 32 hunters who followed them never returned. Normally, a clear took about 8 hours, especially since this rift had no food or rest stops. He thought he should report this to the academy and started to type, but then he stopped. His shift was almost over anyway. The next guy could deal with it. He was only an intern. A man's voice suddenly complimented his hard work and introduced himself. His name was June and his partner's name was Kate. They were from the mayor's office rift management team. The intern scratched his head, assuming they were here to investigate, and passed them a tablet. As June confirmed their IDs, the intern stared at Kate, and it finally clicked. She was the famous huntress who rejected the Icarus Guild. She looked down, flustered by the recognition, hating all the attention. June cut in, asking if they could enter as he stepped toward the gate. The intern just gestured dramatically toward the portal, welcoming them in. He then gushed to Kate about how famous she was, but she pleaded with him to stop. The praise was just too embarrassing. As they stepped inside, the intern realized he forgot to warn them about this place. He watched them vanish into the gate, just hoping they would be okay. June turned to ask Kate if she heard that, but she seemed totally lost in thought. He just decided to let it slide. He then activated the rift scanning program. The system confirmed the rift's registration, clearing them to begin. June scanned the vast desert, suggesting they start mapping the area. But Kate's attention was already fixed on a group of people nearby. They looked like a hunter's camp, but they all seemed completely drained. Several of them were even writhing on the ground in pain. Some were slumped over, while others were lying helpless. Kate asked what could have happened here. He suggested they skip the guesswork and just ask. As the two of them walked over, one of the hunters grumbled about more sacrificial lambs. He noticed June wasn't a hunter and asked what they were doing there. June introduced himself, explaining they were from City Hall. He then asked the hunter for a rundown on the rift situation. They saw many wounded hunters, but strangely no one was leaving. The hunter shot back that they weren't just lazing around. He explained they were trapped and told them to go back, so the pair looked around. That's when they noticed the rift itself. It seemed to be completely still. Jun thought it was a glitch, but realized if it were, he couldn't have entered. Just then, Kate solved the puzzle he was pondering. The rift was in a state of inhibition. She said glitches only happen in B rank or higher rifts, but stalling could happen in any of them. Rift stalling is a rare phenomenon, a unique feature that sometimes just happens. Kate went to the hunter, asking for all available info on this place. He brought up a data slate. The special feature activated with over 25 people inside. To open the exit, they had to eliminate all the normal monsters. Kate scanned the details carefully. To escape, they needed to defeat 280 monsters. June noticed a side objective: take down a champion for a B-rank weapon. The hunter just coughed, suggesting they should all just wait. After all, they'd been stuck for days already. He was sure the academy would send reinforcements soon, but June disagreed. He argued that if they worked together, they could clear the 280 monsters. The hunter scoffed, asking if they had any idea what monsters were actually in here. Like Jun, the others had also assumed they were just fighting orcs. A look of pure terror crossed his face as a painful memory surfaced. Jun and Kate waited in silence for him to go on. He warned that deeper in the rift, they'd run into B-rank trolls. Kate began to panic. Orcs were one thing, but trolls were on another level entirely. The man grimly nodded. Trolls are leagues stronger than orcs, which is why they were all waiting for backup. Kate knew it was impossible to beat trolls with only minor injuries. They can regenerate, so a single powerful finishing blow is required. But that wasn't the only issue. She wasn't confident she could protect the manager in that fight. She told Jun they should turn back, saying it was far too dangerous. But Jun only saw a prime chance to upgrade his weapon. Then an idea sparked. He stopped Kate, asking if she was certain he couldn't be kept safe. If his safety was guaranteed, would she fight? It was the perfect plan. He then looked past her, signaling for her to turn around. June explained he'd found others who hadn't given up and were willing to fight. Ross the archer, Henry the tank, and Arthur the healer. Ross was resolute, saying he came prepared for a B-rank rift, so this was no problem. Henry moved in sync with his partner. He stepped up, offering an escort, saying they couldn't risk an official getting hurt. Jun finally reached him, asking what he was thinking coming here with no armor on. Jun said nothing. Henry glared, waiting for a reply. He was clearly speaking to him. So why the silent treatment? Jun just kept analyzing the data. 3 trolls, 30 meters out. He told everyone to get ready for a fight. As the hunter questioned his call, those exact 3 monsters popped up behind them. The fight started and rift data began streaming in for June. Just as expected, a B rank. The map completion rate was under 5% for now. Henry raised his ornate gold shield, fully prepared to engage the enemy. He charged in, drawing the trolls right to him. Kate was shocked. Those were taunting skills. What a capable tank. His skills could pull all enemy aggression. That gave the team plenty of room to work with. While fighting, he yelled that these trolls were definitely not your average mobs. After a short dash, he landed a massive blow on one troll. He then executed a move, flipping the monster over his shoulder and isolating it. Turning to the others, he told Ross to take out the one on the right. Ross yelled back, "Way ahead of you," drawing his bow confidently. A bright yellow target materialized right on a troll. That was the hunter's mark. It lowers enemy defense and boosts all incoming damage. Ross let the arrow fly, piercing the giant's shoulder and earning a furious roar. The beast yanked the arrow out, snapping it like a twig with no effort. But Ross wasn't backing down. He immediately prepared an entire volley of arrows. He joked to the troll, "This might sting a bit," readying 20 arrows. The troll ducked its head down, maybe to shield its eyes or just hide from the arrow's bright glow. But the attack barely scratched it. It just wasted time pulling them all out. And just like that, things got a lot tougher. The archer was pretty sure that last attack should have been fatal. Once the troll plucked out the arrows, it charged straight for its attacker. But Kate intercepted it poised and ready to strike. She soared high into the air, her sword raised for a downward slash. Her suit's wings and fiery red hair streamed behind her gracefully. Kate moved with unbelievable speed. The troll completely lost track of her. In a flash, she delivered the final blow. The monster roared as its head flew off. She let out a deep breath. That powerful attack took a lot out of her. From behind, Ross shouted, "Hey, we make a pretty good team." But Arthur, busy healing Henry, told the archer to focus on the fight. Ross just grumbled. He asked what Arthur meant. The healer said he avoids useless banter mid-fight. Just then, Kate walked over to Jun and asked if he was all right. He looked confused, saying he was just watching and didn't plan to intervene. Kate explained she was just concerned and happy to see he was safe. Jun's expression shifted as he told her to focus up. Just then he dodged out of the way, narrowly escaping. He yelled at Kate to look behind her. A massive troll was charging from behind, about to crush her flat. She leaped back just in time as the beast's claws tore into the earth. Henry quickly apologized. His skill had apparently misfired, putting her at risk. That was way too close for comfort. She considered what might have happened if their manager had been the target. It would have been a fatal error. He might have actually died. But that thought didn't discourage her. Instead, it fueled her resolve to protect her boss at all costs. Gripping her sword tightly, Kate charged straight into the fight. Nothing was going to stop her now. The troll's jaw dropped. Even the monster seemed stunned by her sheer confidence. She landed several sharp strikes, each one powerful yet graceful. The troll hopped back, trying to create some distance. As she advanced again, it made the only choice it could. The monster let out a deafening roar that shook the very air. The hunter paused, wondering what the troll was up to. Henry prayed it wasn't what he thought it was. But he was right. It was a battle cry calling the pack for backup. A mob of blue monsters charged in, tearing up the ground as they came. The other hunters turned and fled. It was the only logical move. But Kate stood firm, watching the deadly storm approach. 9 monsters were closing in, but she had no plans to back down. Ross saw her. He didn't want to die, but he couldn't just leave her. He caught up to his partners and told them to wait. Kate needed their help. They watched her march toward the entire troll horde. Arthur was unsure, but Henry made the choice clear. They needed to fall back or they'd all be wiped out. But Ross's eyes caught something else. It was her sword. The blade was glowing with a blue light, shimmering with power. It was the sword's aura. From his hiding spot, Jun watched it all unfold. He trusted her skills and made sure to stay out of sight. Henry yelled that it didn't matter if it was a sword aura or not. They couldn't just stand there and wait to be killed. There could be more monsters nearby. But Ross wasn't listening. Kate's confidence inspired the archer. He was sure they could win this. The ogres charged forward, baring their claws and fangs. Kate took a fighting stance, ready to make the first move. Once they were in range, she dashed forward, sword leading the way. Arthur and Henry thought she was nuts, but they had to back her up. So they followed Ross's lead and ran toward the chaos. Meanwhile, back at Jun's place, Jill was having a perfectly normal day. She filled the fridge with snacks, knowing her dad would love them. With a happy stretch, she went to go tidy up the apartment. She conquered the living room, her room, and even all the laundry. Next up, Jill decided to tackle her father's room. She started her usual routine of dusting and vacuuming. Then a book with a funny title caught her eye, 50 Ways to Become a Good Father. It wasn't too surprising since he'd only just figured out how to use hot water. Memory loss is a tough thing. The book was full of his underlines. She felt a little tempted to read it, but something held her back. Jill figured it was best not to pry into his personal business, so she grabbed the vacuum and decided to get on with the cleaning. She needed to finish her chores and graduate from school quickly. She'd become a huntress and pay him back 20-fold. While vacuuming, she spotted a small trash bag under his table. But when she tugged on it, something felt off. It was way too heavy for garbage. She peeked inside and found a magic stone. Had her father thrown this away? No way, he would never do that. It must have fallen out of its box. The crystal looked incredibly expensive, but she put it back without a second thought. She then quickly opened the top drawer of his nightstand. She was not prepared for what was inside and let out a little shriek. Tucked away in a box was a small hoard of magic stones. There were 9 of them. She wondered what they were all worth. There was also a strange purple item with them. Maybe she should just toss it. She also found a hunter's pass for a man with a name she didn't recognize. Meanwhile, Kate was still locked in a fierce battle inside the rift. Her sword flashed again and again in a silver arc. Her next blow landed perfectly, slicing off the troll's arm. 2 more monsters dived at her from above, but she was too fast. Their attack just hit the dirt. She rolled smoothly on the ground, already poised for a counterattack. With a single leap, she closed the distance and landed another powerful strike. Troll bodies were piling up around her, but she continued to attack without pause. For Ross, however, things weren't going nearly as well. A giant blue hand had him pinned flat against the ground. He shoved the hand from his throat and screamed for help at the top of his lungs. Henry called him an idiot, but he had to jump in and save his teammate. He managed to grab the troll from behind. He grumbled to himself about why these monsters were so ridiculously strong. While the 3 guys struggled with one troll, Kate had already finished off another. She was running out of stamina with 2 trolls still left to fight. But she couldn't give up now. She had to protect the manager. With bloodshot eyes, she screamed that she would never surrender. Letting out a battle cry, she charged back in, aiming her blade at the troll's head. But it defended itself, blocking her sword with its massive hands. While the first was busy blocking, the other troll saw a perfect opening to strike. Her eyes widened in shock. That desperate attack had been a fatal mistake. The other troll grinned as it rushed in to land the finishing blow, but suddenly it froze mid-stride as if it had been turned to stone. The troll crashed down, stunning Kate and her opponent. June had to use his powers, or he would have left the rift without his partner. Seizing the moment, Kate took down another troll. Gasping, she fell to her knees, trying to clear her head. She couldn't believe her luck, but what exactly was that? June's voice cut in, asking if she was okay. She smiled back, saying she wasn't hurt. He nodded, satisfied, but they all needed a rest before moving on. With their forces combined, the 3 hunters finally defeated the last troll and collapsed nearby. 2 hours later, the air once again sang with steel, exploding arrows, and roars. Working like a well-oiled machine, they continued to clear the rift. Henry pulled up the status window. They'd beaten over 100 monsters in a few hours. If they kept up this pace, they could clear the entire rift. He glanced at Kate. Her abilities were unreal for a C rank. Was he actually witnessing the birth of a new S-rank hunter? Maybe that's why Ross kept such a close eye on her. Right then, the archer asked what she was doing after the raid and invited her to dinner. Kate got a little flustered, mumbling that she already had plans. Henry decided to step in, suggesting they all grab a meal together, since they owed their lives to her. Ross did not look happy about that. June decided to stay out of the chatter and pulled out his tablet to check their progress. They had successfully mapped 60% of the area. If they kept moving this fast, they could finish today. He also noticed Kate had gotten much stronger. It looked like her mana capacity had doubled. While she tried to politely decline the offer, June was calculating the growth in her level and stats. He decided to rescue Kate from the awkward chat and told them to get ready. The others wanted to rest more, but there was simply no time. Just 200 meters away, an enemy was waiting. And this one was on a whole different level than the others. Just then, the ground began to tremble, feeling less like a monster and more like an earthquake. The jolts grew stronger, nearly throwing them completely off balance. And then they saw the cause of the tremors. A massive 3-headed purple troll. Arthur moved to scan the creature, but the data wasn't necessary. They had to fight it no matter what. Exhausted, Kate searched for any strength she had left, but the monster wasn't about to give them any time to prepare. It let out a horrifying roar. Glowing balls of energy began to form in each of its 3 mouths. Then a beam shot out from one of the heads, aimed directly at Kate. The attack was so fast she was too stunned to even move. June knew in an instant that the troll was too strong. His partner wouldn't survive a direct hit. He bolted towards her without a second thought. Protecting her was the only thing that mattered. Shielding her with his own body, he braced himself for the blast. Then came the explosion. A blast of sand erupted, sending Kate flying backward. She hit the ground, trying to see through the swirling dust cloud. A few seconds passed before the horrifying reality set in. Leaping to her feet, she screamed Joan's name, her eyes darting wildly. Ross was still on the ground, completely stunned by what just happened. Was that just an explosion, or did it hit someone but Arthur already knew? Henry slammed Arthur down, yelling at him to keep his head low. One direct hit would have been more than enough to kill him. Kate kept running through the chaos, calling for June and begging for an answer. And then she found him, but she couldn't believe what she was seeing. June's body was lying on the rocks, completely still. She slowly moved closer, her hand outstretched, almost afraid to make contact. Lightly touching his shoulder, she softly pleaded for him to wake up. Ross shouted for them to find cover, hoping the red-haired girl could hear him, but Kate was lost inside her own head. She knew then that June wasn't breathing. Tears finally started to fall. She hadn't been strong enough to protect her boss. She collapsed onto his chest, begging for a forgiveness he couldn't give. Explosions continued all around them, but she just held on to June, not caring if she died too. Ross realized that if he didn't do something right now, it was all over. He broke from cover and ran toward her with all his might. Henry yelled, wondering what that fool was doing, then told him to go with Arthur. The troll had to reload for its next attack. They had to get in close. This was their only chance to take down the monster. The hunters hated to admit it, but Ross was right. They picked up their pace and followed him. Henry roared that he would attack from the front, ordering the others to circle right. He let out a fierce war cry and charged straight at the monster, his mace held high. But suddenly the troll started gathering light in its mouth again. Henry knew immediately that they had lost control of the situation. The creature attacked much more quickly than they had predicted. The monster fired its blast, sending the hunter flying at an incredible speed. After bouncing twice, he finally skidded to a halt, his shield and mace landing far away. Crushing pain shot through him. He could no longer continue the fight. Several hunter marks appeared on the troll, flashing brightly to blind it. Ross was right beside it, letting loose a shower of arrows. With a confident smirk, he told the troll he was its opponent now, trying to keep its attention away from Kate. Memories began flashing through Kate's mind. She remembered the first time they ever met, how he had pulled her up in that first rift, telling her not to just stand there. They were in the middle of a fight after all. How he thanked her for new experiences and foods he'd never had before. His smile, and him telling her she was the only hunter he'd ever need. She had finally found her place. The tears just kept on rolling down her cheeks. But then a familiar blue status window appeared right beside them. The system window stated that due to her current circumstances, she had learned a new skill oath. Another blast went off behind her as Ross narrowly dodged the explosion. As the troll reloaded, he shot more arrows at its head. The beast's eyes flared with rage. It roared with an open maw, flinging spit everywhere. Ross matched his foe's pace, yelling to show his resolve. Then another bright blast erupted from the troll's throat. Just in time, the archer dove, flattening himself on the ground. But two more blasts hit his feet, sending the last two heads right at him. A massive shockwave launched him into the air, sending him sailing. He landed hard on his back, kicking up a cloud of sand. Ross cried out, having landed right on a rock. Henry lay nearby. Henry told him he should just give up. Why fight if he's whining about a tiny stone? Arthur rushed over, checking to see if he was all right, while the archer was wallowing in his own uselessness. Kate, meanwhile, just kept on reading. She'd gained an S-rank skill, an oath, binding her to a target chosen by her master. The oath doubled her stats and cut damage, taken if her master was within 500 meters. Then a system window appeared, asking her to pick June as her master. Her eyes filled with hope. Did this mean June was still alive? She hugged him tightly, just praying that this would work. Suddenly, glowing bracelets materialized on both their wrists. A system voice confirmed the master was chosen, and within a 500-meter radius, the oath's blessing activated. Her stats soared, and she was ready for battle. Henry struggled back to his feet, but attacking alone was too difficult, so he just dodged the explosions until one finally clipped him. He fell, yelling at Ross to stop moping and get up already. The archer stayed put, asking for just a little more cover. Arthur decided his partner was completely shameless. Just then, Kate sprinted by, telling Arthur to watch June because he was alive. Seeing her, Ross instantly jumped up, shouting he'd provide cover. Henry just stared at him, completely dumbfounded. A second ago, that moron was totally useless. His whining had nearly gotten him killed multiple times. Another blast landed near Henry, sending him flying once more. He crashed down beside Arthur, who said if they get hurt right after his heals, then his healing was pointless. He told them to wait while he checked on June. Henry grabbed his arm, begging to be healed up first. Arthur could only sigh and agree. June finally came to slowly opening his eyes. He saw Kate had made him her master. She'd clearly gotten much stronger. At least twice as powerful. He figured it'd be odd to pop up right after he nearly died. So he decided he would just lay low for a bit longer. At that moment, Kate was charging decisively at the huge troll. She weaved across the field, taunting it into attacking her. The troll, tired of her games, decided on a brand new tactic. All three heads roared as one unleashing a massive fire blast. Kate was completely blindsided. Evading the flames, she dove to the side, hitting the ground. The pain was intense. She balled her fist, slamming it hard into the earth. All at once, her instincts screamed with lethal danger. Glancing up, Kate saw the troll's massive foot descending right on her. A series of explosions rocked the troll from behind. He flinched. It was Ross. Ross yelled to Kate that he had its back, telling her to focus and keep fighting. Just then, another round of explosions hit their mark. The troll wasn't just getting knocked around anymore. It used the impacts to its advantage. Ross's attack had the troll distracted. This was the perfect opening for Kate. She launched herself forward, slashing deep into the monster's shoulder. The beast roared, turning to her as it clutched the bleeding wound. This looked like the first time it had felt any real pain. Not waiting for its attack to recharge, it swung wildly, sending Kate flying. She landed perfectly on her feet, using her sword to steady her stance. In that instant, she felt it. Her attack power had grown. She wouldn't lose to this troll. Kate channeled her aura back into the blade and charged forward once more. She delivered another powerful slash to its shoulder, then kicked off to land safely. As the monster recoiled from the hit, she was already moving behind it. Before it could react, she landed a flurry of deep cuts across its back. It reached one massive hand back, trying to grab at the fresh wounds. Its eyes frantically searched for the source of all this pain. Spotting her, it lunged to grab her, but Kate smoothly evaded the attack. Her counterattack struck one of the troll's three heads squarely. It howled in agony as several of its huge fangs shattered and flew out. The troll dropped to one knee, its formidable strength finally fading. The monster took another blow to the head, this time from Kate's powerful kick. It crashed onto its back, its furious roar shaking the very air. Kate simply circled it with a confident stride. She coolly sized it up, deciding on the final blow. Leaping onto its chest, she knew in that moment this was the end for the beast. Her sword erupted in a brilliant blue aura. She had finally mastered the sword's powerful aura. She thrust the blade straight into its head, then paused. The battle was finally over. Ross stared in amazement. The young woman had just soloed a major boss. He let out a breath, saying that was way too close. Henry chimed in that thanks to him, they'd almost died a few times. From a distance, June watched her victory unfold. Her growth was amazing, but she still had a long way to go. He looked down at himself. One thing was absolutely certain. He definitely needed to buy new clothes after work. His were full of holes. He could already picture Jill yelling at him for getting his clothes wrecked at work. June finally stood, pulling off a boot to dump out a pile of sand. Arthur saw this, remarking that June looked totally fine. Kate overheard the comment. She turned and saw her manager alive and well. She moved faster than in the entire fight, tears welling in her eyes. Kate collapsed into his arms, finally able to just breathe. Ross grumbled, calling June a zombie bastard. He was clearly jealous of June getting all the attention. Arthur came over asking how he survived, but June had no idea himself. Henry was moaning dramatically, certain his end was near. He felt like he'd just aged 100 years in a single moment. Arthur aimed his hands at June, offering to heal him just in case. He waved his arms around frantically, starting to panic. Arthur was baffled. His healing skills did nothing since June was perfectly fine. But how was that even possible? He took a fatal hit, yet he was completely unharmed. Ross tried to change the subject, asking what it mattered anyway. The important thing was that he was alive. Henry suggested they rest since everyone was too exhausted to continue. It was definitely the smartest move. The hunter then asked about dividing the magic cores, and the answer surprised him. June said they should just split everything equally between them. Henry was thrilled, since the law blocked him from earning hunting money. But he quickly mentioned he had a useful app for Rift-related work. Since June couldn't take a share, he asked for a small favor instead. The guys looked at him curiously, wondering what he needed. He just pointed over to the dead troll lying nearby. Turns out killing the monster came with a special bonus reward. It was a B-rank sword, which he wanted them to give to Kate. They smiled happily, agreeing since she was the real reason they won. A delighted Kate held her new sword, her eyes shining with joy. She just couldn't thank them enough. Ross noted how happy she looked, and she just laughed in reply. Suddenly, June tensed up, hearing footsteps approach from behind. 2 hunters from the Icarus Guild appeared. Emily smiled and said hello. Gale, however, kept his usual stern look. Gale then made a slightly snarky comment. He didn't expect to see them here, then glanced at the dead troll. He commented that Kate had gotten stronger, taking down a champion. She beamed pleased to hear praise from such a famous hunter. She smiled sweetly and gave her thanks. June shot back with a smirk that it was all thanks to Gale's suit. Gail slowly approached June, reminding him he'd lost the suit, not gifted it. Emily decided to step in and break up the argument. She gently suggested they get moving as they had more work to do. Gail agreed, saying he and Emily would scout ahead. He snidely remarked that the others could keep relaxing, then left. Emily walked over to June, offering a business card for a potential transfer. June looked confused and asked what she meant. She clarified she meant transferring Kate to their guild. Hearing this, June slowly started ripping the card into little pieces, as he tore the business card to shreds right in front of Emily. He said he wouldn't stand for anyone being treated like an item. At that moment, his teammates' jaws just dropped. Did he seriously just rip up a card from the top guild? Jun added that he doesn't mind unless that someone is one of his people. In that case, he won't hold back. Emily froze, a cold sweat breaking out. This was not going according to plan, but she hadn't meant any harm. The hero gritted his teeth, warning her this was the last time he wanted to hear it transfer and Kate in the same sentence. He glared at Emily, saying that talking about a person like a thing is deeply offensive. Then he let the pieces of the card flutter to the ground. They got back from the rift late that evening. The boss decided to throw a little party to celebrate their successful run. June skipped out since Jill was waiting and he'd already spent time shopping for new clothes. On the phone, he could hear his cheerful, tipsy colleagues. It sounded like Kate was retelling the whole incident with the Icarus Guild. He pictured Kate jumping up, trying to perfectly reenact his line about protecting his people. Greg thanked Jun for his hard work and for looking out for their co-worker. In the background, Nate was practically bouncing with excitement. Suddenly, Nate snatched the phone from the boss and started his own chat with Jun. He commented that maybe shredding the business card was a bit much. Jun couldn't help but apologize for being a little dramatic. But then he heard cheers of approval from the other end. He had to ask what they meant, since their opinions were changing by the second. Nate explained that sometimes you have to bow, but other times you have to let your anger fly. The Icarus Guild might be huge, but that didn't mean they had to be pushovers. "You did the right thing," Nate shouted into the phone. He yelled that if Kate left on her own, it'd be fine, but treating her like property was just wrong. Greg chimed in, saying he didn't mind angering a few smug S-rank hunters. Nate pulled the phone close, lowering his voice to a whisper for a personal question. He asked Jun if he could be his person too, and get that same kind of awesome protection. Jun was at a loss for words as shouts for another round erupted in the background. He figured no one was listening anymore, but said a quick, "See you tomorrow," just in case. He hung up with a smile, happy about the day, Kate's progress, and how well she fit in. With that, he began the slow walk home. No matter how well things turned out, it had still been an exhausting day. He arrived to find Jill waiting for him in their spotless apartment. Jill said hello, but then something else immediately caught her eye. She'd already noticed his brand new clothes. June fell silent, hoping he could somehow dodge the inevitable question. He started a wild story about stumbling upon a huge sale on his way home. It was getting chilly, he explained, and he felt bad for the sweet old lady selling the suits. Jill's eyes narrowed, taking in his new outfit. Jun went quiet, knowing he was already caught. He rambled on about a flash sale, the cold weather, and a poor old woman who just had to sell that last suit. Jill just stared, her expression completely unconvinced. She asked about the costume lady, and that's when June messed up. He desperately needed a way to change the subject. Thinking fast, he casually mentioned he could really go for some tea. Instantly, Jill hurried to the kitchen. While filling the kettle, her mind raced over her new treasures. The handle, those strange magic stones, and the hunter's license. It suddenly clicked. Her dad was an office worker by day and a hunter by night. She imagined him in a cool suit, getting secret alerts for missions. It had to be true because his co-worker from the office, the one who'd visited them, was also a hunter. She pictured two partners in slick suits heading out to save the day. Next, she saw Kate flipping over his back as they both dodged a spray of bullets. As her imagination ran wild, she started to get genuinely angry, and just like her, the kettle on the stove began to boil over. June walked in and calmly pointed out that the kettle was screaming. Startled, she panicked and turned accidentally, knocking the kettle off the stove. It went flying through the air without a second's thought. June lunged forward, catching it perfectly with both hands. While his daughter stared in complete shock, the hero just told her to be careful, since she could have been burned by the boiling water. That was the final straw for her. She yelled, asking him what on earth he was holding. June was confused. Obviously, it was a kettle. But he'd forgotten one very important detail. It was scalding hot. It took a moment for his brain to catch up as he stared at the hot metal. June quickly put the kettle down, trying to play it off like it wasn't that hot. He claimed the water probably hadn't even boiled yet, but the kettle's high-pitched whistle said otherwise. She grabbed his hands, turning on the faucet and forcing them under the cold water. Jill apologized for being so careless, worried he could have been hurt. As he dried his hands, he asked what she had been thinking about so intensely. She let out a small gasp as if suddenly remembering something vital. June just gave her a questioning look as she bolted into her room, leaving him baffled. But a second later, she was already rushing back to him, holding a piece of paper that she handed over. He started to read. It was an informational flyer for the Hunter induction ceremony. Jill hesitated, trying to downplay it, saying it was nothing important, and that she only wanted him to know about it. She then mentioned it was a weekday, and since he was busy, he really didn't need to come. June rubbed his chin in thought. It was next Monday. How would he get time off work? But he could see this was everything to her, so he promised he would be there. Jill's entire face lit up with joy. A bright smile beamed across her face as she thanked her dad. Meanwhile, June missed something else. Ross went to Gail to complain about how June treated Emily's card. But Gail couldn't figure out why he'd come all this way for something so minor. He stopped his frantic waving and froze in place. Looking at him, she insisted that June be punished. His behavior was getting on her nerves, and Gail had her reasons. It was finally lunchtime the next workday. With the office empty, it was a perfect chance to ask the boss for time off. He stared from his desk, trying to figure out the right excuse. Needing Monday off, he finally approached his boss, apologizing first. He asked to work just a half day next Monday afternoon. Greg asked for the reason, and June replied that it was personal. The boss nodded, asking if it was a sensitive matter. June had no desire to reveal the real story behind his request, so he simply confirmed his boss's suspicion. Greg thought for a moment. Nate already had a business trip scheduled for Monday. June was confused about what kind of business trip that was. His boss reminded him about the initiation for new hunters next Monday. Their office received an official request for all nearby organizations to attend. Because of that, they really couldn't ignore it. June's eyes shot wide open. That was the exact event he needed to go to, but Nate was assigned. He added that they wanted June focused on working with Kate, so he wasn't asked. However, Greg said if it was truly an emergency, he could approve it. The department could manage having 2 employees absent for a day. June assured him not to worry, saying he'd just go grab some lunch. He immediately went to Nate's usual spot, a cafe he visited every day. June sat down beside him and got straight to the point. He said he heard Nate was going to the Hunter Academy ceremony. Nate nodded, confirming he was scheduled to be there. From 8 in the morning until 2 p.m., then back to the office. Our hero then asked if he could attend the ceremony in his place. The question caught Nate completely by surprise. Why the sudden need for someone to take his spot? June paused for a beat, knowing he couldn't hide the truth from Nate. He began explaining he has a daughter, and her initiation is this Monday. That's why June was so desperate to be there. Nate did a perfect spit take, spraying his soda back into the glass. He wondered since when did June even have a daughter. When he learned June was only 26, it got even more complicated. If his daughter was a Hunter initiate, that would make her 17. He followed up with the next logical question. Did June have a wife? June lowered his gaze, forced to admit Jill wasn't his biological child. This just left Nate even more confused, trying to make the story make sense. As they were crossing the road, Nate asked if Kate knew about his daughter. Nate seemed relieved after June confirmed Kate had visited their home. He mentioned that she had even met his daughter. Nate then asked how Kate took the news. June said her reaction was normal, but he couldn't figure out the reason for all these questions. Nate considered everything and told June to just go talk to the boss. He also promised his colleague that he would keep all of this a secret. The week zipped by, and just like that, it was Monday. Jun stood near the academy, watching the huge crowd that was forming. Wow, this place was seriously packed. He wondered if the school's high price was the reason or something else. Turning around, his eyes landed on an especially large group of people. Listening closer, he figured it out. They were all chanting Emily's name. In the middle of it all stood the famous huntress from Icarus. Everyone wanted her autograph, but Emily politely refused, saying she was in a rush. People kept running past him as he smirked. Even famous people had to go to school. He hoped she wouldn't notice him because a meeting would only spell trouble, but it was too late. Emily had already called his name and was walking over with a smile. Jun clicked his tongue, obviously annoyed. This was the very last thing he wanted right now. She even seemed to be speaking louder on purpose just to get attention. Then suddenly she bowed deeply before him, apologizing for their last encounter. She confessed that she got too excited and had rushed things. She admitted she didn't consider his colleagues' feelings at all. Emily held her respectful bow as a curious crowd started to form around them. They whispered that this guy must be a big deal for her to bow to him. Jun pleaded with her to stand up because everyone was staring at them. But Emily insisted, saying she didn't want to leave a bad impression. He admitted he'd been harsh too and offered his own apology. Instantly she chirped, "Okay," and stood up straight. The crowd shot him dirty looks, and he felt like he'd just been played. Emily offered him her business card again as a sign of her peaceful intentions. With a grin, she mentioned this card was totally unrelated to his colleague, Kate. Jun asked if it really had nothing to do with her. In that case, why would he even need her card? She simply asked him to take it in case he ever needed a helping hand. He glanced at her, then at the card, a surprised look on his face. After a moment, he gave a slight bow and genuinely thanked her for the gesture. Emily suggested they head inside before the event began, and they went their separate ways. A voice echoed from the speakers announcing the start of the ceremony. All guests were guided into the hall while new students gathered in their own section. Among them was Jill, her uniform matching her brown eyes perfectly. Meanwhile, Emily was still watching Jun. She could feel his aura and knew he was no ordinary person. She was sure of it. She'd felt the same power from him back in the rift. Emily was certain Jun was hiding his true power, but she couldn't figure it out. For now, all she could do was wait and observe what happened next. One day, that hidden strength would have to reveal itself to the world. Unaware of her gaze, Jun kept searching the crowd of students for Jill. Suddenly, he spotted her, wondering how he found her so fast in such a huge crowd model. He kept a cool exterior, but inside he was absolutely beaming. A faint blush appeared on his face as he wondered if this was what being a dad felt like. The announcer introduced the special guest honoring the event today. The Hunter Academy's president, Adrian Chaw, stepped on stage and bowed. As the introductions continued, Jun started scouting nearby for a place to treat Jill to lunch. His phone buzzed. The oath-taking ceremony was about to begin. A girl with deep blue hair stood at the podium, reciting the oath's articles. The women next to him whispered that she was the Sword Emperor's younger sister. Her brother was the greatest hunter, and she was already an A rank. Jun took another look at the young woman on the stage. He just couldn't picture her being an A rank hunter. He remembered Jill saying to be nice to her, since she was destined for fame. Well, he figured now was a good time to start. All the new hunters recited their vows together. A round of applause followed as the host declared the ceremony was over. Jun quickly slipped outside, scrolling on his phone as he waited for his daughter. Finally, he heard her excited voice and happy shouts. She was jumping for joy, still in disbelief that she was officially a hunter. Jun tried to get a word in, but eventually just gave up. He simply held out the bouquet and congratulated her. She was speechless, her face lighting up even more. Suddenly, she looked down, her voice trembling as she thanked him for the bouquet. Tears began streaming down her face. She mumbled that he really didn't have to get her flowers. Jun gently told her she deserved them and suggested they get going. They made their way across the academy's main square. Jill mentioned training started in 2 days and they'd been assigned to classes. Jun casually asked which class she was placed in. She looked a bit embarrassed, admitting she was put in Class D. Jill quickly promised to work her hardest to get promoted to Class A soon. Her entire future rank depended on it after all. He feigned ignorance, acting as though he didn't know what she meant, and he simply thanked her for the detailed explanation. Then he ruffled her hair, adding that he knew she'd be in Class A in no time. She giggled and asked if Jun was hungry, suggesting they find a place for lunch. He pointed toward a place he saw that had spare ribs, but Jill was already zooming off to the left. She was shouting about a place with amazing spicy sausage stew. Suddenly, she had to stop short as a huge crowd blocked the street. Her jaw dropped and she started screaming when she saw who was at the center of it all. It was the Academy president and Emily from the Icarus Guild with their security team. Just then, another man emerged from a nearby car. A handsome, dark-haired man with a cool gaze headed in their direction. Jill let out a huge scream. It was the Sword Emperor, Jonathan himself. The entire star-studded group had model. They'd only gone a few steps when Emily suddenly turned back to look at them. She paused, asking if they'd already found a place for lunch. Jun replied they were just about to leave, while Jill was completely starstruck. She'd just met her idols in the flesh, and one of them actually knew her dad. That's when Emily cheerfully suggested they all eat lunch together. She turned to Jill to ask what she thought, and of course Jill eagerly agreed. Just then, President Chaw walked over asking Emily who her friends were. She explained it was June, the Rift manager from the mayor's office, the one she'd mentioned before. Adrian immediately put 2 and 2 together. This was the manager in charge of that huntress with the amazing stats. He politely offered June the oar with a warm greeting, which June returned with a bow. Emily then hugged the girl with June, asking if she was his younger sister. For a moment, June was at a loss for words. Should he lie or tell the truth? He finally just said that she was his daughter. Emily froze in surprise, then leaned in and asked the girl for her name. As Jill crisply announced her name like a soldier reporting for duty, Emily's mind was racing, trying to connect the dots. June jumped in, explaining it was all due to a very unique set of circumstances. Meanwhile, in the background, a classic sibling spat was heating up between the famous hunters. One insisted everyone was waiting for her, while the other grumbled he only noticed because he couldn't stand her. Hadrian smoothly intervened and introduced Jonathan, a man who needed no introduction. June found himself staring at the founder of the 3 great mana control methods. Jonathan in turn studied him with a curious gaze. So this was the man that incredibly talented hunter refused to leave. June offered a respectful bow, and the legend returned it, looking genuinely pleased to meet him. Adrian also introduced Olivia, Jonathan's younger sister, who was currently whining about her perfectly fine hair. Taking all this in, Jill covered her mouth, her mind completely blown. She was actually meeting the living legend who developed the techniques every single hunter uses today, with a million thoughts buzzing around in her head. All she could do was gape in awe, which Emily found incredibly endearing. Jonathan noted June's impressive build and asked if he was a hunter, but June simply told him no. The famous hunter seemed a bit disappointed, saying he would have made an excellent one. June just thanked him for the very flattering compliment, adding that he was perfectly content with his current job. Jonathan then turned to his sister, telling her to come say hello. Olivia clicked her tongue, stating she wasn't interested in people weaker than her. Jonathan said her name with a sharp edge, giving her a look that screamed, "Behave yourself." She trudged forward and gave their new acquaintances a half-hearted mocking greeting. Then she stuck her nose in the air, adding that this didn't mean she acknowledged them. With the awkward introductions finally over, the president suggested they head to lunch. Their destination was a VIP restaurant located right inside the Hunter Academy, and as you might expect, the food there was absolutely divine. Adrian mentioned he also enjoyed breakfast here this morning. Emily then started a chat with June, recalling they'd first met in this very building. She remembered them talking with Gail before the Hunter rank assessments. June then asked how her partner was doing. Emily joked that he was just as gloomy as ever. As Jill lifted the spoon, her thoughts drifted to her father's job. He was a rift manager. Did that mean he actually went inside? The spoon touched her lips and she let out a happy scream. She'd never tasted anything this incredible in her entire life. Olivia sighed, rolled her eyes, and muttered a single word, "Plebeians." Jonathan instantly shot her a furious look, hissing at her to be quiet. She just crossed her arms with a pout, complaining that Jonathan was only ever rude to her. The whole situation was really frustrating for him. Jonathan just wished his sister could be more like Jill for once. Jill waved her hands humbly, saying she was so grateful for the delicious meal. She then noticed that June seemed to be enjoying it too. He was already on his third plate. Leaning in, she vowed to try cooking that well herself. Emily then suggested Jill take a preliminary assessment while they were there. The girl's face lit up. She could finally learn her level and potential. Olivia chimed in with a self-important tone. The assessment, she explained, used very special equipment. With a glint in her eye, she added that the process was expensive, a luxury for the few. And once again, she earned an angry glare from her brother. Olivia threw up her hands, completely clueless about what she'd done wrong this time. Jill thanked her for the offer, but knew she couldn't ask her dad for money. Adrian, understanding her concern, said the academy would cover the cost. Jill immediately agreed. Jonathan then suggested they should test June's abilities. Hearing this, the young man lowered his gaze. He said he would have to decline the offer. Emily was shocked. Good results could make him a hunter. She practically begged him to try. It was a golden opportunity, and Jonathan was also dying to know the results. He glanced at their hopeful faces and felt he had to agree. It was clear they weren't going to take no for an answer. Jill went first, stepping inside a machine that glowed with a soft, pinkish-white light. After about 5 minutes, a voice announced that the evaluation results were printing. Emily grabbed the result sheet from the printer, her eyes widening in shock. Jill had the potential to awaken an A-rank skill. Her projected final rank was also A. Jonathan added that only 5% of hunters reach that level. Emily encouraged Jill, saying if she develops her skills, a bright future is guaranteed. Jill then happily walked over to Olivia. Olivia remarked that perhaps she wasn't quite as hopeless as she'd thought. Jill just beamed and thanked her, ignoring the backhanded compliment. Emily then turned to June. Now it was his turn for the assessment. Olivia muttered that it was a total waste of time, suggesting they all just grab coffee instead. And again, she was met with angry looks that she completely failed to understand. With a sigh, June lay down on the machine as the system confirmed he was ready. He wondered if he should have just kept refusing their offer. If the results came out weird, it would just create a ton of questions. He glanced at the eager faces watching him. They clearly suspected something. And then it clicked. Our hero suddenly figured out how this thing worked. It sends out mana, then measures how much your body lets through. Jun knew it'd be easier to just block the mana from his body completely. Trying to let just a tiny bit through would be far too tricky. The machine's mana simply floated around his body, unable to get inside. A moment later, the computer announced the test was complete. Everyone stared. His scan had finished way faster than anyone else's. Jun hopped off the machine and casually asked if the results were ready. Emily began to read, stating that the player's potential was unmeasurable. But that didn't make any sense at all. Jonathan looked at the paper baffled and asked if this had ever happened. When no one answered, he suggested they should just run the test again. But that wouldn't be necessary. A smug Olivia couldn't help but chime in with her own comment. Apparently, he just lacked the talent to be a hunter. Emily kept staring at the sheet. Even the weakest people still get an E or F rank. She nervously bit her nail. A result like this was basically unheard of. It just shouldn't be possible. Emily pleaded with our hero to try again, insisting there must have been an error, but Adrian quickly stopped her. Another test could be risky as multiple scans might strain a normal person's body. Jonathan muttered that he needed to review the results himself. Because of this, he told June to focus on strengthening his body first. He said the results might be completely different then. Sometimes people awaken their powers late, so there was no need to lose hope yet. Emily, however, was positive she'd felt a hunter's energy coming from him. There was simply no way she could have been mistaken. As the group continued to debate, June just asked if he was finally free to go. A few days had passed, and June was now crashing at the office. Greg let out a long sigh, his eyes glued to the monitor. From all the endless work, huge dark circles had formed under his eyes. Nate reviewed the papers again, but the letters and numbers were just a blur. He looked up from the paperwork, suggesting they all hit the sauna tonight. They hadn't showered in days, and the office was really starting to smell. The boss glanced down at his shaky hands. The idea sounded amazing, but he barely had the energy to even walk there, so he figured he would just stay here for one more night. With that, it seemed both employees were also staying for another all-nighter. June's phone buzzed. It was a midnight call from Jill. He couldn't ignore her anymore. Answering the phone, he heard Jill's quiet and serious voice. She asked him if he was planning on coming home tonight. Looking at the mountain of paperwork, he knew he wasn't going home tonight. She offered to bring him some food, but he said he'd just order something if he got hungry. Jill even offered a change of clothes, but he turned that down too. He just assured her that everything was totally fine. Besides, it was far too late for her to be wandering around. The second he hung up, his boss asked who called, wondering if it was Kate. He gave a surprised look and simply replied that it wasn't. To which Greg grinned, telling him to just spit it out already. June decided it was time to change the topic. He asked if the Inwangsan mountain rift was confirmed. His boss just stretched back. He complained about this time of year when the academy needed help with student field trips. They had to inspect 100 rifts that were below C rank, and pick one that was suitable for total beginners. June realized he'd better tell Jill, since they would definitely cross paths. Besides, thanks to Emily's big mouth, the girl already knew that his job was connected to the rift zones. When he finally got home late, a tired sigh echoed from the other room. Jill came out and asked him to at least text her when he'd be that late. He quickly apologized and promised he'd remember to do it next time. Jill's mood suddenly flipped as she announced her rift field trip for next week. It was her very first time, so she was incredibly nervous. Even for just an F-rank rift, Jill's expression was dead serious. It was the perfect opening for her to ask what he actually did for work. He hesitated vaguely, explaining that his department handled rift-related matters. Jill immediately wanted to know if that meant that he personally went inside the rifts. Seeing her calm face, he figured he could reveal a little and gave a hesitant nod. But another question followed right away. She wanted to know what precisely he did inside. June started frantically listing off duties, trying to throw her off. Noticing her sad expression, he told her it was nothing to worry about. That turned out to be the absolute wrong thing to say. She stomped her foot, exclaiming that of course she'd worry since he was in danger. She yelled that leaving things like this was completely unacceptable. Then she pointed a finger at him, announcing a special training session. June couldn't believe his ears for a second. Her, a girl who had just enrolled in the Hunter Academy, was going to train the world's strongest hunter. But Jill didn't know that, so she argued that she had the potential to become an A-rank hunter. Clenching her fist, she declared they would train every weekend from now on. She also ordered him to apply for body strengthening on Monday to awaken his mana. Sweat dripped down June's forehead as he thought to himself, if anyone from Murim heard this right now, they'd pass out. But Jill had already thrown on her jacket and was ordering him to follow her. They headed to a nearby alley to start. Jill asked to see his status window for a quick check. June pulled it up and realized he had to lie. All his stats were maxed out. As he panicked over the numbers, she asked him to read them out loud. So he started making things up on the spot. Strength 10, agility 6, health 9, inner power 0, and no skills. Jill immediately stopped him. 25 points. That was nearly E-rank hunter level. His strength and health were already higher than hers. Maybe it made sense since her dad was in great shape. Jill decided to ask about the inner power stat, which she'd never heard of. June waved his hand, saying he misspoke. His mana was at 0. The girl bought it, saying that was normal for a regular person. Though his other stats were odd, Jill moved on to the training. She wanted to teach him a ranged technique for fighting monsters. It might not work right away, since her dad didn't have any mana yet. but she decided to demonstrate how it was done. She held the gun out, gripping it firmly with both hands. A blue ball of mana began to form around the weapon. She explained that channeling mana from the body into the gun is called reloading. If he could master that, he'd be halfway there. With that, she told him to give it a try. He fumbled with the gun, wondering how to release just a little bit of mana. Jill told him to close his eyes and feel the light energy inside him. Then he should picture that energy flowing like a river into the gun. He took a breath, telling himself he could do this if he just kept control. The gun erupted in a blue glow and Jill screamed in shock. She couldn't believe he did it on his very first attempt. Her scream startled Jun, who immediately cut off the reloading process. The girl just stared at him with wide, amazed eyes. It looked like her dad was a secret genius. He played it off as a lucky fluke, then failed on purpose when he tried again. Still, Jill was a little bummed. It had taken her a whole month just to learn how to reload her own weapon. But even with his talent, she didn't want him becoming a hunter. It was too dangerous. Jun promised he wasn't planning on it and suggested they head home. It was getting pretty late and honestly a little boring. The next morning at work was the final prep day before the field trip. With all the data checked and the gate selected, the office was quiet. As Nate walked past Jun's desk, he saw his colleague forging documents. They claimed he'd completed Hunter Academy certification and had 1 mana unit. Nate shrieked, saying he was definitely going to prison for this. He was a public official committing fraud right at his desk. Jun calmly told him not to worry. He was only showing the document to one person. The main character then had to explain the whole long story behind his actions. They went out to lunch, where he started from the beginning. He admitted it was all to calm his daughter's fears about his job. Nate remarked that his life was certainly complicated, but never dull. Then he recalled his daughter's field trip was tomorrow run by them and wondered if he'd have to stay hidden. But Jun shook his head, saying there was no need to hide anymore. Jill already knew he worked at the Rift department. His colleague let out a huge sigh of relief, all that worrying for nothing. Plus, Nate brought up the big event they had coming up next week. The Hunter Academy was scheduled for a full-scale inspection. This was their big chance to finally manage a B-rank rift. They all hoped it would go off without a hitch for a good review. He thought about their boss, who had poured his heart into this project. A good rating meant a big promotion was on the line for him. But if they failed, they'd have to lay low to avoid the boss's fury. And just like that, the day of the field trip arrived. They led the new students into the designated training rift. The academy coach gathered everyone around to get their attention. He introduced his colleagues from the Rift department, their guides for the day. Greg flashed his absolute best smile and gave a cheerful wave. He explained they were in an F-rank rift full of totally harmless goblins. Still, rifts are unpredictable, so he reminded them safety was the top priority. After his seemingly endless safety speech, he finally asked for questions. Seeing their bored faces in the dead silence, Greg suggested they start exploring. The students took off into the rift like it was a morning jog. Soon enough, they found some goblins who looked like they regretted everything. A thirst for battle lit up the young hunter's eyes. They kicked, shoved, and completely steamrolled the poor little monsters. Greg noted that he'd seen this 1,000,000 times, but the newbies always creeped him out. Watching the chaos, he asked Nate if any might actually join them on contract. Nate kept the mood light, telling his boss to just keep the hope alive. June noticed Olivia standing nearby and asked if she wanted to jump in. The girl scoffed, saying hunting weak goblins was a total waste of time. Then she asked if he was the one in charge of student safety. He said he was just an assistant, and Olivia clicked her tongue, unimpressed. She snidely asked if he was actually good for anything at all. June told her to keep it down, as Greg was already peeking over his shoulder. Greg chimed in, telling her not to be nervous for her first training. If anything happened, the adults would definitely have her back. Olivia just rolled her eyes, wondering who was really protecting whom. She doubted they even had the stamina to outrun the goblins. Greg called her a little punk and told her to get to training with the others. She needed to stop bothering the adults while they were working. Just then, Nate rushed over and whispered that she was Jonathan's sister, as in the Sword Emperor himself. In that instant, Greg's entire attitude changed as he dashed after the girl. Suddenly, he just had to offer her some refreshing fruit tea. Nate came back to June chuckling. "Looks like the boss is in for it today," he said, leaning in closer. He was just dying to know which of the students was his daughter. He pointed to a girl standing nearby. Nate noticed she was really cute and probably super popular with the other kids. Jill spotted her dad and his coworker looking her way and gave them a little wave. The coach announced they had exactly 1 hour for solo hunting practice, and after that, they all had to meet back here. Hearing that Nate suggested June should finally go talk to his daughter, June practically shot up and rushed right over to her. His colleague had never seen the guy move so fast in his entire life. They found a quiet clearing where June watched her train and offered some advice. After another shot, he told her she had a real gift for shooting. She thanked him quickly. adding that she trained alone just so he would be even prouder of her. Suddenly, June heard a strange whistling sound and instantly went on alert. The atmosphere began to shift. The sky above turned dark. A harsh wind kicked up and thunder rumbled in the distance. A goblin materialized nearby, one that looked different from the others. It had an odd purple tattoo on its forehead. It looked like a boss monster. But that's impossible. There shouldn't be bosses in this rift. June, Nate, and Greg had checked the data several times. Looking at it, Jill also saw the weird tattoo and its dark skin. The girl put an arm out to shield June, telling him to get back. Without a second thought, she charged her gun with mana and fired at the goblin. The bullet hit the creature square in the forehead and it dropped to the ground. Killing it was much easier than she had expected. She turned to tell June they were okay, but something began to glow behind her. June started screaming in terror because things were definitely not okay. His device pinged, Rift Guardian, defeated. Behind Jill, a red and black crack tore through the air. A brand new rift had just opened. Its difficulty level would be set completely at random. June kept yelling for her to run. She finally saw what was behind her. A vortex erupted from the new rift and started pulling her inside. June ran to save her, but the girl was already consumed by the unknown. Without thinking, he launched himself in after her. In that instant, the rift that took them both vanished. The other students, who were in the middle of their training, had no idea what was happening with the weather and were completely terrified. Even Greg, who was on the ground covered in fruit tea, watched in horror as the sky warped above them. June and Jill found themselves in a scary rocky cavern bathed in a red light. Jill, completely drained, collapsed. June scanned their surroundings. This place, it looked a lot like Murim's world. A system message popped up. You have entered Isis Cave. The ghoul survived for 30 minutes, and then it appeared before them, a huge dragon with burning eyes and massive fangs. Jill began to shake. Only a single word flashed through her mind. Death. June walked to her and looked down. She was in a state of total shock. He let out a heavy sigh. Why did the weirdest things always happen when he was trying to lay low? The hero grabbed the mana pistol his daughter had dropped on the ground. Jill cried out, asking what on earth he was doing. He told her to stay put, promising to handle this dragon quickly before walking towards it. The girl tried to stand and stop him, but she was completely drained of strength. The dragon watched the guy approach for a moment, then got ready to attack. With a sudden roar, the dragon ordered them to get lost. It then unleashed a torrent of fire from its mouth. Jill screamed for her dad to come back, knowing a single blast like that could kill any hunter. However, John didn't show any sign of stopping. He was completely confident the dragon couldn't harm them. He simply held up a hand and the flames parted around him on both sides. Jill couldn't believe what she was seeing. It just seemed impossible. She wondered if the dragon had spared them, but its shocked face said otherwise. So this was all her dad's doing. The very same dad who couldn't even use a mana gun a few days ago. Just then, Jun remarked that since she already took a shot, it was only fair that he got a turn. The dragon stared baffled by the man who just survived its strongest attack. The gun filled with Jun's mana, glowing with a bright blue light. As the charge grew, the air around them began to tremble. The dragon screamed at him, begging him to stop. It insisted that time was up and he had already won. Jun told it to speed up the speech, as he didn't want to break the gun holding back all this power. The dragon pleaded to ask one question, and Jun actually agreed. And then the massive winged monster asked the silliest question. Is there any way you don't kill me? Jun asked why. The dragon replied that its life was now his to decide. Jun couldn't hold the power any longer and fired a gigantic blast from his pistol. He aimed it slightly to the side to avoid hitting the dragon directly. The creature shrieked in fear like a 5-year-old child. The blast flew a few meters past its head and continued into the distance. A powerful explosion erupted far behind it. It was clear that a direct hit would have been the end. The dragon turned to him, asking what kind of insane power he had. It was still confused, having never met anyone with that kind of ability. Jun looked at it coolly and asked if it wanted to know how to survive. After getting an eager nod, he pushed off from the ground. He announced that they would start with a couple of taps. Jun flew at the beast, his fist pulled back and aimed for its head. What is this guy doing? Is he really about to punch a dragon? And then the punch landed right on his opponent. It felt like being hit by something 10 times its own size. The dragon trembled, grabbing its head. The pain was just unbelievable. As a huge bump appeared on the monster's forehead, Jun suggested they begin with obedience training. He also informed it that the only way to survive was to become his pet. And so Jun began training his new pet, as Jill recalled the legend of the dragon Isis who countless hunters had failed to defeat. Even S-rank hunters and monsters couldn't touch him. He was undefeated. She'd heard the rumors, but seeing this with her own eyes was something else. The legendary hunter was on the dragon's back, making it do push-ups. Jun tapped its back, asking if it wanted 6 more sets or to just do them right. As her dad yelled army chants, Jill just stared, wondering who he really was. Jun asked if the dragon was top tier, even tougher than the ogre general. It nodded, enthusiastically confirming it was extremely useful. He thought the dragon would make a pretty reliable bodyguard for Jill. His only small complaint was that the creature seemed a bit slow. Jill finally cut in, asking her dad if it was time to head back. In a single leap, he hopped off the massive beast and agreed with her. But before leaving, they needed to get one thing straight. Jun started to explain, but Jill finished for him, saying this was all a secret. His eyes widened in surprise when she promised not to tell a soul. She knew he had his reasons, and since they were family, she'd respect them. He nodded to her, then turned to the dragon, asking if it would stay like that. He then asked if it could change its form as it was attracting way too much attention. With a pointed finger, he warned that misbehaving outside would have consequences. The dragon understood perfectly and said it would transform right away. A bright light enveloped the dragon as it began to shrink in size. It kept getting smaller until it was only about knee-high. Before them now stood a tiny, adorable orange dragon with huge, pretty eyes. Jill squealed, calling it the cutest thing she'd ever seen and naming him Yoji. Yoji looked miserable. Once a feared beast, now he was just a pet. Jun glanced down at him and asked if he had a problem with something. The little dragon quickly apologized, insisting everything was perfectly fine. The hero told his daughter to pet Yoji, explaining he was softer than he looked. Yoji dutifully rolled onto his back, offering his belly for a scratch. Inside the rift, the menacing weather finally started to clear. The dark clouds parted, letting the warm sunlight shine through. Greg and Nate noticed the change, relieved. The students were all safe. But something was nagging at the boss. He realized he hadn't seen June that entire time. Just then, June casually appeared and apologized for being away. Greg clicked his tongue, saying it was about time for them to leave. But he stopped mid-sentence, noticing who was with his subordinate. He pointed at Jill, asking if Jun knew that particular student. Jun immediately replied that yes, she was his daughter. As Greg's face twisted in shock, Jun added that there were special circumstances. He gave a short, simple apology. His boss grabbed his shoulders, saying he understood completely. After all, everyone makes a few mistakes when they're young. He nodded to her, then turned to the dragon, asking if it would stay like that. He then asked if it could change its form, as it was attracting way too much attention. With a pointed finger, he warned that misbehaving outside would have consequences. Jill approached Greg with a polite bow and introduced herself. The boss kept glancing between June and his daughter, but our hero simply repeated that he couldn't share details. Just then, Nate walked over to introduce himself to Jill. She was delighted to meet him, as her father had spoken highly of him. As Greg listened to the polite chatter, something strange suddenly caught his eye. It was a tiny, bright orange creature. He asked where on earth they found such a curious little pup. The boss wondered about its dyed fur and breed, while June quietly signaled for Yoji to keep still. Greg started poking at its face, suggesting they should probably take the little guy to a vet. But when the boss picked him up, Yoji let out a sharp bark. The man yelped in surprise, yelling that it was trying to bite him. June explained this animal was his new partner and that he'd awakened his talent as a trainer. His coworkers immediately crowded around, asking how he'd discovered his new power. And did this mean he was finally going to become a hunter? Our hero didn't hesitate, saying a hunter's career wasn't for him. However, this new skill would be perfect for exploring rifts. The boss let out a huge sigh of relief, happy he wasn't losing a key employee, and hugged the orange creature. Realizing it wasn't time for cuddles, he put Yoji down and suggested drinks after work. Greg then turned to Jill, inviting her to join them as well. He promised to give her some pointers for her own hunting career. Jill declined the offer, but when he mentioned buying meat for everyone, she instantly caved. Their pleasant conversation was suddenly cut short by a woman's voice. It was Olivia, who was desperate to know all about the strange animal. Yoji looked up at her, putting on his most heart-meltingly cute expression. The girl immediately scooped the little dragon into her arms and spun him around. Jill gently asked her not to just grab him like that. June stepped in to tell Olivia that it was his pet, and he'd just awakened a new ability. She shrieked with excitement. The trainer class was one of the rarest in existence. She then asked if that was even possible to know yet. After all, the official preliminary assessment results hadn't been released. But her main question was whether he'd become a hunter now. June calmly replied that he had different plans for his life. Her voice rose with disbelief. Why would he refuse? A trainer is wanted in every guild. June just repeated that he'd use his skills to explore the rifts. A nearby academy official overheard their talk and looked equally baffled. Greg jumped in, reminding everyone that guilds pay trainers just for being on the roster. He pulled June away from the hunter, suggesting they go, and noted that everyone chooses their own path. And only June knows what he truly wants. June realized this was all just to keep him from considering a transfer. So he reassured his boss that he had no plans to go anywhere. Greg's entire face lit up instantly. Tears welled in his eyes as a massive, genuine smile broke out. He then glomped onto June from behind, burying his face in his back and declaring his love. Trying to escape the hug was pointless. The girls laughed, watching them shuffle awkwardly across the lawn. Yoji simply closed his eyes, tired of the drama. It was tough seeing his boss get grilled like that. Nate suggested they wrap it up and finally get some dinner after such a long day. The next morning, the office atmosphere was tense and simmering with drama. Greg and Nate kept quiet, as Kate gave Jun an earful about being left out of dinner. Jun let out a weary sigh, repeating again that he was incredibly sorry. She rested her head on his desk, moaning about how unbelievably cruel they were. Kate just couldn't believe they hadn't called her. All it would have taken was a single phone call. She'd been away from work for so long and hadn't seen any of them. She had really been looking forward to the get-together. Her voice got louder with every word until she yelled that she was part of the team too. On top of that, she'd heard they had pork barbecue for dinner last night. That was a big deal for her. Barbecue and drinks were totally her thing. But instead, she'd spent the whole day waiting around the office and cleaning. Jun tried to stop her because that wasn't what happened. They actually had beef barbecue. He had just made a terrible mistake. Pork was a big deal to Kate, but beef was way more expensive. That made the dinner seem even more exclusive. She just froze in her seat, totally speechless. Greg and Nate huddled around Jun, trying to run damage control by claiming it was acorn-fed pork. That was why they said it tasted so much like beef. He turned to Greg, insisting it was beef, because the chef cried when he saw the check. Greg tried to give him a look, signaling it was better to just agree with her right now. Kate just lowered her head. She quietly called them liars for not only ditching her, but also lying about the food. The boss tried to fix it, suggesting another barbecue dinner tonight, but Kate was already on her way to the door. She announced she was going to get barbecue all by herself. Nate grabbed some candy and ran right after her. He kept on apologizing as he caught up. Kate absolutely loves sweets. Already chewing on a piece, she told him not to forget she was a part of the rift department too. Nate looked pretty pleased with his little trick, but he agreed with everything she said. He asked if she could look out for them during the inspection next week, adding that she was the most crucial part of their team. But it looked like that whole inspection was about to fall apart. Greg was shouting into his phone that they couldn't just cancel everything. He yelled to stop repeating the new rule that only B-rank hunters could handle B-rank rifts. The entire department had been preparing to manage this particular rift for a solid year. Now, just a week before the test, it gets canceled. He was still yelling when the other side hung up. He slammed the phone down and called them bastards. Then he told everyone to get back to it, said he'd be back soon, and stormed out of the office. Jun asked if this wasn't the project they specifically requested help on. Nate just said this kind of thing wasn't new. His coworkers sighed, grumbling that it was just a way for the higher-ups to show who's boss. Later that day at Jun's house, a little conflict was clearly brewing. Yoji wasn't happy that Jill was making all the rules. She tried to soothe him, explaining again that she was cleaning and they couldn't go out. Besides, you never know what could happen out there. Yoji questioned why she'd be scared when she had a dragon, but she was really worried about him. She couldn't handle him on her own. The dragon took offense, thinking she assumed he'd cause trouble instantly. Jill proposed they all go for a walk once her father got home. In response, he dropped to the floor, kicking and squealing like a toddler. Once his tantrum wore out, he heard her father returning home. After greeting Jill, he went to Yoji and lifted him up by the head. He reminded the dragon his daughter prefers cute things, not noisy ones. He then ordered Yoji to the wall with his hands up. As they sat for dinner, Jill asked what to do about Yoji. Jun said he bought food for him, but for now he'd stay in timeout. Jun praised Jill for the amazing dinner while the dragon only got to enjoy the smells. He added that her cooking gets better every time and offered to do the dishes. Jill quickly jumped up, insisting that she would wash the dishes herself. It seemed to be another wave of gratitude from her that he had to accept. After a moment's pause, he reluctantly agreed to let her. He went to the kitchen asking her to act normally since nothing had changed. But how could she agree she knew everything was different now? An image instantly flashed through her mind. It was her dad literally controlling flames with his bare hands. She wasn't sure if she could ever act the same way again. She recalled her promise to protect her dad once she became a hunter. She'd even set up training so he could defend himself a little. Her own thoughts were screaming at her for being so silly back then. Jun watched from the side, completely confused by her behavior. It looked like a battle was raging inside her head. Suddenly a voice asked how he could possibly do that to her. Jun flinched, but then realized it was just the TV Yoji turned on. He was glued to some drama on screen, calling the main character an idiot. Jun sat on the couch, reminding him the order was to face the wall, not the TV. The dragon bowed deeply, apologizing and promising to be good. Jun told him to stop the theatrics and get up immediately. Jill came in reporting that Yoji hadn't eaten since lunchtime. Jun mentioned a bag of food for him was just outside the door. Jill grabbed the bag and started inspecting what was inside. Then she pulled out a dog bowl, making the dragon absolutely furious. Jun asked what the big deal was, questioning if he expected to eat at their table. The dragon sputtered. He had human rights, or well, dragon rights. Jun, however, was not convinced, so he grabbed a bag of kibble and filled the bowl to the brim. Then he presented the dragon with his meal. He then went to his room asking Jill to keep Yoji away from the fridge while he showered. The dragon stared at the bowl in total disbelief. How could anyone expect a mighty being to be satisfied with kibble? But with no other choice, he sadly picked up a pellet, trying to ignore the smell. Just then, Jill snatched the bowl away, telling him to stop. Tears formed in Yoshi's eyes. Was she taking away his only chance at dinner? She simply hushed him and returned with a plate of baked ribs. She urged him to eat fast before her father got out of the shower. In his haste, the poor dragon choked and started coughing. Jill handed him a glass of water. He took one sip and froze, staring at the glass. With eyes full of adoration, he vowed to protect her for the rest of his life. Jun felt relieved the day was finally over as water dripped down his skin. The next morning, the office was buzzing with excitement once again, but this time it was for a happy reason. Everyone gathered around Nate, who announced he'd found a B-rank hunter to sign with them. They were old school friends. The guy had always been strong and focused. When Nate mentioned their work troubles, his friend said he'd already made enough as a hunter. He was just going to help out an old buddy. His coworkers cheered him on, saying the boss could finally relax. And right on cue, a thrilled Greg burst into the office. He was literally yelling about how much he loved Nate. He grabbed him in a huge hug, totally ignoring whatever he was saying. Nothing else mattered. Nate announced they were meeting at a fancy restaurant tonight. But before he could finish, Jun stepped right in front of him. He said he would go, adding it was better if the chief stayed behind. Greg looked a little disappointed, but had to agree. Soon the two co-workers were heading up in a sleek elevator. Jun couldn't believe they were going to a bar this early in the day. Nate told him to look on the bright side. When would regular guys like them ever get to visit a place this pricey? Besides, they weren't expecting anything out of the ordinary. His friend was just buying them a friendly drink. Jun doubted it was that simple. The whole thing felt a little strange. The elevator doors opened to a lovely receptionist. Nate asked if Adam was there, yet mentioning their appointment. The woman smiled, confirming he was waiting, and led them inside. They followed her down a long hotel-like hallway with odd sounds coming from the rooms. The receptionist opened a door for them and wished them a good evening. Nate walked in first, happy to see his old friend again. Across from them sat three huge guys with a mountain of liquor on the table. The roughest-looking man greeted them, saying it had been a while. And this guy was supposedly Nate's old school friend. Nate froze for a second. This didn't exactly scream business meeting. It felt more like a shady lounge right before the nightly entertainment arrived. Jun quietly assessed the room. He knew right away this meeting was bad news. Their host apologized for being late, joking that he should have taken a cab. He then introduced Jun, explaining they had been partners for more than a year. Adam patted the empty seat, inviting them to join him. He told his guys to hurry it up as government officials were waiting for him. Nate thanked him as Jun pulled out his phone and quickly typed something. Adam poured a shot of bright orange liquid, offering them a drink. He then looked at Jun, insisting he drink as well. Jun simply agreed. They started talking, sharing old memories from back in the day. Adam mused about how much time had passed since their school years. While Jun took his shot, Nate talked about how much he loved his job and coworkers. He added how cool it was that Adam, a B-rank hunter, could afford such a nice place. Adam casually mentioned it wasn't that expensive, but figured it would seem that way to someone living paycheck to paycheck. He then snarkily added they had little to talk about with someone who takes the metro to save money. Finally, he introduced his friends, pointing out they were all B-rank hunters too. The men said to skip the formalities since this would likely be their last meeting. Holding back a laugh, Adam asked them to be a little less rude to people from the government. Jun studied them all. The mood was getting tense, and he was ready to meet it. One of the men glared back at him before taking another sip of his beer. Nate tried to get back to business, asking Adam about the contract with the mayor's office. He also added that their boss was really looking forward to the meeting. Perhaps it was still possible to arrange an introduction. The other hunters couldn't hold back their laughter any longer. They covered their faces, trying to hide it. Jun knew this wasn't a business meeting. They were just here to be made fun of, but then to everyone's surprise, Adam offered to sign the contract for them to start work the next day. He took a drag from his cigarette, saying there was just one condition. Adam dropped his cigarette into a glass and offered it to Nate. Drink it, and the deal was his. His friends erupted in laughter. They mocked him, telling him to be polite with government officials. One of them reminded Adam this was his old friend from high school. so maybe he should take it easy before the guy burst into tears. June watched Nate tremble with anger. He subtly pulled back his coat. He'd been messaging someone, and now he gave the signal to come inside. Adam raised the glass, asking Nate why he was hesitating when the deal was so close. June suddenly stood up, telling his partner it was time to leave this awful place. He then reminded Nate that they actually had another meeting scheduled. Our hero glanced one last time at everyone in the room and said there was no point wasting their time on scum like this. Adam's face twisted, daring him to repeat what he'd just said so boldly. June ignored him, completely turning his attention back to Nate. He announced that Emily from the Icarus Guild had agreed to sign with him. Seeing his colleague's stunned expression, he continued. She's already on her way here and said she was just in the area. Adam just laughed. Did they seriously think an S rank would sign with them? June calmly agreed, so the hunters immediately called him a liar. Nate broke into a cold sweat hearing June's casual tone. Just then, the door to their room suddenly swung open. Emily stood there smiling, saying she couldn't wait any longer. She found it odd, she added, that they would delay for these guys. The hunters' laughter died instantly. They were speechless. Standing right before them was the real Emily. June nudged his partner, asking how he even got Emily to agree to this. Emily mentioned a nice cafe nearby and suggested they head over. Her eyes flickered toward the unpleasant men at the other table. Clearly, she was eager to leave. Nate practically flew from the room, apologizing profusely to her. June asked for an Americano, saying he would catch up in a bit. Nate hesitated to leave his friend, but Emily firmly led him away. The door clicked shut, and June let out a heavy sigh. Without even turning, he offered Adam a drink from the ashtray glass. A moment later, it was clear he should not have turned around, because when he did, his eyes were already blazing red. Not far from that shady place was a really nice cafe. Nate and Emily sat with their orders. He was visibly shaking. He gripped his knees to stop the shaking, but it was no use. This was the hunter whose card June ripped up. She must be here for revenge. The woman just watched him intently. He was completely terrified. His pride was clearly wounded, but she wasn't sure how to react. Should she comfort him, pretend not to notice, or just stay quiet? Just then, the buzzer went off. Their order was ready. Nate jumped up to get the order, but Emily was already at the counter. The barista handed over their 3 ordered Americanos. He watched her go. She seemed to float, and he found it captivating. She returned with the coffee and finally broke the silence. Emily told him not to worry about June. He would be just fine. Nate argued they were B-rank hunters. If June got hurt, he would never forgive himself. Emily just laughed, feeling sorrier for the guys left with his colleague. He stared surprised, reminding her that June wasn't even a hunter. The woman took a sip of coffee and asked him to just wait a minute. Her gut feeling was never wrong. Back in the room, June stood firm, offering Adam that delicious drink. He then added that if Adam drank it, he would let him live. Adam got up, invading his space, sneering, "And what if I don't?" He gritted his teeth, asking what some little punk could possibly do. June didn't bother replying. He simply waved a hand. Adam slammed into the wall, completely paralyzed from the impact. He panicked, screaming that he couldn't even wiggle a finger. June leaned in, draping an arm casually around his neck. He whispered a simple suggestion, drink his own cocktail. But when Adam refused, his mana sparked red lightning crackling on his hand. The moment it touched Adam's neck, the man screamed in agony. The blonde hunter stared, confused why his friend wasn't fighting back. He threw a punch at June, hoping to create a distraction. But June sensed the attack coming as if he had eyes in his back. He simply raised one hand. The hunter slammed into it, then flew straight into the wall. The third hunter wisely stayed back, not wanting any part of this. June gave him a dead stare, warning he'd kill anyone in his way. With Adam subdued, June noted he'd been a very bad boy. He placed a hand over the hunter's mana core and sent in another jolt. Adam's eyes went wide, his body seizing up instantly. It felt like every organ inside him had just ruptured. He collapsed, sliding down the wall as his mana vanished, gone for good. June gave him one final look with some friendly advice. He'd better start looking for a new job since his hunter days were over, and from now on he'd be keeping a close eye on all 3 of them. If they ever caused another headache like this, he promised to find them. He'd then rip out their tongues and make them eat them. The door slammed shut, ending their night and their careers. June strode down the hall, never once looking back. Now all he wanted was a nice Americano. Meanwhile, the chat at the cafe was getting awkward. Nate clarified that Emily wasn't actually signing a contract with them. Flustered, she confirmed she couldn't do it. June had just asked for a favor, saying he ran into some weird guys. Nate shot up from his seat, bowing and apologizing for his mistake. Emily told him to sit, explaining she was helping for her own reasons. He just stared at her, completely baffled. What kind of goals could she possibly have with June? Just then, our hero arrived, apologizing for being late, as Emily waved him over. Nate quickly asked if he was all right and if anything bad had happened. June just smiled, saying they offered him a drink and had a nice little chat. Emily cut in, asking if she was officially on his good side now. He confirmed it and thanked her, which made Emily jump for joy. Nate just felt relieved that everything had worked out so well. If he'd come alone, he would have been in some serious trouble. June then asked if they were both free for dinner. He said he had a little problem back at home. Apparently, Jill went a bit overboard practicing her cooking, and if they didn't help eat, it'd all spoil. They happily agreed. June stepped aside to call Jill, who knew nothing about this supposed feast. Nate, meanwhile, was still flustered. He apologized to Emily again for all the trouble. She understood his concern, but honestly, everything was fine. He stepped outside to call his daughter, hearing her voice moments later. He asked if she felt down and if some good food might cheer her up. She lowered her book, saying some delicious food would definitely help. He reminded her she's an amazing cook, and you could hear her smile. Jill got curious, asking why he was suddenly bringing this up. He explained it wasn't for him, but for his colleague Nate. She shot up excitedly, asking what Nate liked and what she should make. June had no clue, so he suggested one of her signature dishes. Then it hit him Emily was coming over for dinner, too. Jill's eyes immediately went wide with surprise. She raced to the kitchen, promising an amazing meal in just 2 hours. 2 hours flew by, and soon enough they arrived at June's place. The doorbell rang, and Jill called out that she was on her way. She opened the door, her bright smile met by their happy faces. Hearing the door, Yoji darted into the hall to greet his owner. Emily froze in her tracks, asking June what that creature was. June introduced his new partner, though Yoji didn't look thrilled. Nate explained that, on a recent trip, his colleague awakened as a tamer. Emily gasped in total shock. That seemed impossible, as awakenings require talent and a certain lifestyle. Tamer skills usually appear in people who raise or care for animals. She knew he was special, but she had no idea he was this unique. Then her eyes locked onto a small detail on the little creature. On its forehead was a strange mark shaped like the number 1. She recalled a dragon from 3 years ago with a 10 on its forehead. It took 3 S-rank hunters everything they had to take it down. It had to be a coincidence. This cute thing couldn't be a dragon. Meanwhile, Nate was on a call over by the window. He told his boss he felt awful about what had happened earlier. Greg told him not to worry, to get some rest, and wished him good night. Hanging up, he turned to see June motioning him to the table. But when Nate entered the dining room, his jaw completely dropped. The table was covered with at least 10 different amazing dishes. He had to ask, "Do you guys always eat like this?" Of course. With an amazing cook like Jill, the house was always full of good food. Nate took a seat, sincerely thanking everyone for the day. It had been a rough day, but thanks to them, it ended perfectly. June accepted his thanks and offered his own in return. Without Nate, his career would have been over, and they wouldn't be here. Emily added that Nate was a great junior, praising them both at once. He had to ask, "Do you always eat like this?" Of course. With an amazing cook like Jill, the house was always full of good food. Nate took his seat, thanking everyone for how the day turned out. Nate was absolutely beaming. The evening couldn't have gone better, and he thanked them all again. June jumped in, suggesting they eat before everything got cold. Thanks to Jill's hard work, dinner was a blur of happy chatter and laughter. But of course, all good things must come to an end. Everyone thanked Jill one last time for the amazing meal and then headed home. Jun settled in at his computer, scrolling the feed when an ad caught his eye for an attacker to help clear a B-rank rift. The post mentioned it was a fantastic chance to team up with some powerful hunters. Right now, the party had 2 healers and a tank. And at the very bottom, it said newcomers were welcome. Did that mean even a C-ranker like him? He carefully read the post again. The notice mentioned merfolk monsters that most hunters tended to avoid. He decided to just call and get his questions answered. June apologized for the late call, but he'd just seen the listing and wanted to see if they were taking C-rank hunters. A guy on the other end said it was no problem since their tank was an A-ranker, it'd be a cakewalk. He then added that the group also had 2 healers. The whole thing would be completely safe, so he had nothing to worry about. June paused to consider this. It was pretty strange for A and B rankers to recruit a C-rank attacker, but he didn't have a choice. He had to help Kate reach B-rank, so he agreed and asked for the meeting spot. The man quickly gave him the location, explaining that it wasn't far from the rift, and that they'd be waiting for him at 10 in the morning. June nervously tapped his fingers on the table. This was all a little too easy. No interview or pre-meeting, which was unusual when forming a party. Hunting in rifts is incredibly dangerous, so knowing your partner's strengths is critical. That's what the interview process was supposed to be for. So why hadn't they asked him anything at all? He turned it over and over in his mind while everyone else in the house was sound asleep. He pulled up the ad one more time. It was 3 hunters, all from the Solomon Guild. He felt like he must have reread the ad over 100 times, but he still couldn't figure out the catch. He grabbed his phone and dialed Kate. The girl picked up almost instantly. June apologized for the late Friday call and asked if she had a minute to chat. Kate assured him it was totally fine. She was just organizing some things and was free to talk. He asked if she was available to meet him tomorrow morning at 9:30. She practically squealed with joy, shouting that she'd be there, even if the world was ending. Jun thanked her, saying sorry one last time for the late call, and told her he would see her tomorrow. After hanging up, he knew his racing thoughts wouldn't let him sleep. He threw on a jacket, glasses, and a mask, and grabbed his bag. He decided to scout the rift beforehand, just in case. Meanwhile, Kate was on cloud nine, absolutely thrilled about their date tomorrow. About 30 minutes later, June arrived at the location and hopped the fence. He just needed to get in, take a quick look around, and get out unnoticed. At last, the new rift's location was found. Our hero walked right in without a second thought, completely confident he was safe. He appeared inside a stone cavern with a long tunnel stretching deep into the dark. Jun pulled up the app, registering rift number 6001. But he suddenly paused. Something unusual had caught his eye. A wide trail of reddish-pink goo coated the floor, looking a lot like a giant snail had passed through. He casually scooped up a little bit on his finger. Yep, it was poisonous, but harmless unless it touched an open wound. He mused to himself that no Marok he knew of ever had poisonous slime. Then a sound from behind. Something was confidently walking his way. It was a Maroke, a one-eyed purple creature with a mermaid-like tail. A quick glance at his screen confirmed it. This monster wasn't on the official list. His eyes shifted to its tail, so that's where the weird slime came from. The monster tensed up as if expecting something, then let out a massive roar. Jun's glare was all the warning it needed. One more move, and it was history. Terrified, the monster backed away, raising its hands in surrender. Completely unfazed, our hero strode right up to it. He grabbed the Marok's head and began a very thorough inspection. He turned its head this way and that like a vet giving a puppy a checkup. Next, Jun ordered it to open wide for a look inside. It had some poison on its fangs, but this was different from the slime. The main trick would be getting the slime off its skin. A tough job for any hunter below B rank. He flicked on his phone's flashlight, searching for the organ that produced the toxic goo. Taking its paw, he finally found what he was looking for. Aha. Taking out its legs first would make this fight a breeze. And with that, the job was done. He thanked his patient with a swift kick. He then gave it a simple choice. If you want to live, hide in the deepest corner of this cave and stay put. Now all that remained was to find where the map data cut off. Suddenly a system alert popped up. He was now being targeted by a Muroka. If spotted within 50 meters, his stats would drop by 30%. He just kept exploring the cave anyway. The map was 99% complete, just that final 1% left to find. Jun had already explored pretty much everywhere, which meant this was the last spot. And right ahead stood a massive metal door. The system warned him a huge monster waited behind that door. But that didn't scare him one bit, so he strolled right in. The very air shook as the rift's boss appeared. It was a 15-meter shark swimming through the air as if it were water. Its jaws were packed with massive gleaming teeth. Aha, a special sacrifice quest had started. The boss Shakus would attack anyone crossing the red line. To clear the quest, you either had to survive for 5 minutes or offer up enough sacrifices. Reaching the sacrifice goal would seal Shakus for a full hour, and the reward the chance to crack open a treasure chest. The current sacrifice count was 9 out of 10. Jun figured no hunter could survive that long, which meant 9 poor souls had already died here. The hunters didn't care about his rank, skills, or even his name. All they really needed was a sacrifice. Figuring cruel people were everywhere he stepped past the red line. Instantly, Sheikah shot towards Jun, its massive jaw wide open. But as it drew near, it sensed Jun's terrifying power and froze in fear. In a total panic, the shark tried to flee back across the line, desperate to get away. Our hero just sat on the chest, waiting for the quest timer to run out. Amused by the boss's reaction, he snapped a quick photo for the rift data. He scanned the room carefully, logging all the information he could find. And then a notification popped up. The special quest was complete. With a satisfying click, the chest lid swung open. The shark would be sealed for 1 hour, and the red line was gone for good. Jun reached inside and pulled out the A-rank Shaktus bone sword. He held it high. The stats were incredible. He just knew Kate would love it. Swinging the sword like a happy kid, he headed home. Arriving home, Jun eased the door open, trying not to wake anybody up. He spotted Yoji, his so-called guard dog, snoring by the food bowl. He gave him a gentle nudge, telling him to sleep in the corner and not in the main walkway. Yoji sleepily mumbled something about Jill hiding meat under his kibble. Jun already knew his daughter was sneaking him treats, and he was glad they were friends. Inside his room, he gave the new sword another look. Maybe he should sell it since it wasn't really useful to him personally. As Jun stepped into his room, Yoji leaped up. A sudden chill filled the air. The dog jumped on Jill's bed, whining about why the heated floors were off in the winter. Muttering about animal cruelty, he finally passed out right beside her. The next morning, Kate arrived an hour early, too nervous about being late. She wore a white blouse and a pretty pink suit, her hair and makeup done perfectly. She stopped to check her reflection one last time in a cafe window. She was totally ready for her date, even waving to a little kid inside. She felt wonderful, enjoying the bright and cheerful mood all around her. Just then, Jun came into view, casually pointing out that she was early. She smiled secretly, hoping he hadn't seen her admiring herself a moment ago. He walked up and said he needed to finish organizing the data from the rift. Kate's heart dropped. She had so badly wanted this to be more than a work meeting. He handed her the sword, telling her it was a huge upgrade from her current weapon. The girl's eyes went wide in disbelief. It was an A-rank sword. Where could he possibly have found it? Jun just said it was a secret, but that it would definitely help her get stronger. Afterwards, he suggested they find somewhere to sit down. He said he wanted to brief her on the details of the next rift they were tackling. She looked at him with a wave of disappointment. In that moment, it felt like all the color was draining from her world. Kate lowered her head. "I guess I should have known," she said softly. All that effort, picking out the white blouse and the lovely pink suit, all that time she spent on her hair and makeup just for this. They clearly weren't on a casual outing. June then noticed her very expensive earrings, which he was certain he'd never seen before. A stunning necklace highlighted her slender neck, along with an outfit unfit for combat and a picnic basket no one takes into a rift. He felt like a complete moron for not mentioning the rift yesterday. When she called his name, he braced himself for the absolute worst, and then she said this was all his fault. Her presence seemed to loom over him, growing larger by the second. As a hired hunter, Kate said she required advance notice about any overtime, but she hadn't been told a thing. This meant it was a massive screw-up on his part. She then yelled that he had to take full responsibility. June quickly apologized, promising he'd get her overtime pay sorted out. But Kate just gripped the basket, stating that she didn't want any money. Instead, she said a dinner together paid for by him would fix everything. Then she added ominously that it must be a dinner for two with no one else invited. He quickly agreed. She reminded him it was a promise he had to keep and then led the way. They found a spot in a nearby park to eat. June happily ate her sandwiches, admitting they were amazing. She was pleased to hear that, but noted they really shouldn't be late. Our hero explained he'd already called the other hunters to meet them at the rift. She then described how inside the rift they would face merfolk, which ooze a toxic mucus. Merfolk can take down hunters using a paralytic venom from their fangs. He was still explaining when he suddenly asked if she was paying attention. Of course she was listening, but it was nice watching him enjoy her cooking. He continued saying that hunters paralyzed by the creature's venom would be unable to move for quite a while. Kate nodded, offering him another sandwich from the basket, but he was already full. The girl mentioned how much effort she'd put into making them. Not realizing she'd be working the weekend, she held one out, telling him she wouldn't budge until he had eaten every last bite. After their meal, they grabbed a cab to her place since she didn't have her gear. They ended up being 20 minutes late, but June was sure the other hunters would still be waiting. Our hero handed the hunter his business card, saying he was the one who called. The man ignored the card and simply asked why they had arrived together. Their team was only expecting one person, and one of them did not look like a hunter. June explained that Kate was the hunter, and he was simply her manager. Their department was formed 5 years ago and normally handles C-rank or lower rifts. The hunter pointed out that this was a much higher-ranked rift. June told him not to worry because Kate was a very capable B-rank hunter. Plus, he'd be going with them. That last statement seemed to really surprise the hunters. The guy shot back that civilians aren't allowed inside rifts, but June casually explained that's a perk for managers and staff. The short-haired hunter asked for time, but his partner was eager to team up. He dragged his buddy along, urging everyone to head into the rift. Then he quietly schemed to just kill them both inside the rift. Inside the rift, the group cautiously scanned their new surroundings. Suddenly, Kate's bracelet started to glow. A notification appeared, Oath Blessing activated. Master within 500 meters. She turned to him with a happy smile. Even in this uncontrolled rift, his tablet was still fully operational. June checked in on her, and Kate said she was doing great. He approached her looking oddly uncomfortable for some reason. He felt like she hadn't paid attention to his warning about the Marur folk. Kate quickly reassured him. She repeated his advice, paralyzing fangs, and to aim for the paws first. She told him not to worry, totally confident she could handle it. The hunters paused. They'd been walking a while now, but hadn't seen a single monster yet. Just then, June announced, 5 Marur folk 10 meters ahead. A hunter gave him a weird look. How could he possibly know that? But their answer came quickly as Marur folk hissed from the shadows. Sure enough, 5 of them charged forward exactly like June said. While the guys were still frozen in shock, Kate zipped right past them. She sliced off the monster's limbs one after another. This neutralized their deadly poison threat. One hunter stared amazed at how she dove into the fight. At that pace, he thought she'd never even make it to the boss, so they joined the fray, protecting their shot at the treasure. From a safe spot, June observed the hunters gauging their skills. He noted their lack of a healer, then called out, 7 more 15 meters. Kate instantly dashed ahead. The hunters yelled for her to stop, saying 7 was too risky. She disagreed, so she leaped fearlessly right into the middle of them. She disabled their paws before delivering the final strikes. Less than 5 minutes later, she stood among the fallen monsters. June praised her speed, telling her to rest, since the area was clear. The hunters just stared, completely bewildered by who these two were. He gritted his teeth, realizing their skills would ruin his plans. 2 hours had already passed since they entered the rift. But Kate was still totally pumped for more action. Her movements were a blur, disabling each monster before finishing it off. It was like she was literally faster than the wind. The Marur folk didn't even stand a chance, and the red-haired tornado left another 10 monsters in her wake. Kate lowered her blood-stained blade, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. The guys from Solomon's Guild just stared, totally amazed. Her sword skills were something else. It's unreal that she's supposed to be just a C rank. Not a single B ranker on the team could match her flawless precision. With skills like that, she had to be B rank, maybe even pushing for A rank. Kate told Jun she felt it. Seems she'd powered up a little bit. The guys were just in awe. They couldn't get how she handled the merfolk so easily. To Kate, though, it was all pretty simple. Defeating enemies is easy when you already know all their weak spots. Jun had explained that cutting their paws off would leave them totally defenseless. They'd never heard that before. How their manager knew was the real mystery here. Jun called out to Kate, suggesting they press onward. And just like that, more battle cries. They'd found another merfolk pack. While the team struggled with one, Kate easily handled all the others. But there were fewer than usual, like only the elite guards were left patrolling. To the team, that just meant an easier path to their objective. One of the hunters walked over, asking if she needed any healing. The girl just waved him off, saying she was perfectly fine. But she did suggest checking on June, since he could be a handful. They went to check on the manager, but he was completely unscathed too. Another hunter guessed that some unexpected variables had complicated their plan. Now the 3 of them needed a plan to get rid of this huntress. But trying to take her out would probably mean they wouldn't escape unharmed. Jun glanced over at the guy who was busy plotting their demise. He cut into his thoughts once again, suggesting they keep moving. After a few more turns, the group exited the narrow cave path. They now found themselves standing at a fork in the road. Jun checked the map, then announced they should go left. Kate started to follow, but a hunter objected, claiming he knew the area better. The man stated with confidence that the right path was correct. Kate just blinked. If Jun said left, then of course left was the right way. The hunter fumbled for words against her flawless logic, but decided to try. He reminded her that both she and the manager were newbies here. His team, however, had run this dungeon many times, so they knew the way. Kate paused, then said they could go right while she and Jun would go left. With nothing else to say, they agreed and offered to lead the way. One of them muttered he wanted to land the final killing blow himself. 10 minutes later, they were still trying to figure out who those two actually were, because right in front of them was the boss room, a trip that used to take them 2 hours. Kate let out a happy giggle from behind, as the guy clicked his tongue annoyed. The last hurdle left in this rift was the final boss fight. Kate warned Jun it was too dangerous inside, so he agreed to just watch. She nodded happily, telling him to be careful and keep his distance. Suddenly, a strange chill ran right through her body. One of the hunters cast a curse, dropping her stats by 30%, even for a hunter so close to A rank in this weakened state. They figured there was no way she could handle all 3 of them, but her oath's blessing simply fizzled their spell out. The hunter's jaws dropped. How did she cancel the spell? Was there any way to actually beat her? And in that moment, it all finally clicked for Kate. She knew something was fishy, but she never guessed they were actual hunter killers. With her sword already drawn, there was no time to think, as they prepared to strike her down. Just then, a voice from behind yelled for everyone to freeze. Kate slowly turned her head. The blonde guy had a knife to June's throat, warning her to stand down if she wanted June to keep his head. Kate's whole world just came crashing down. She failed to protect him. June glanced at the knife and coolly asked what the plan was. The guy just grinned, saying he'd find a use for it as he dragged him toward the huge gates. The heavy doors slammed shut and Kate collapsed to the floor. She felt completely torn apart. How could she have missed the signs? Why couldn't she protect him again? The same questions haunted her over and over. Inside the boss room, the guys surrounded June and stepped forward. They knew Sheriff wouldn't move until they crossed the red line. But the beast suddenly roared and charged right at them. Yet as it got closer, it saw June, spun around, and quickly swam off. The hunters were baffled by its strange behavior. Then they noticed another strange thing. The red line had vanished. This whole day felt like a prank, but it was far from a joke. They checked their status window, which said the quest was done and the chest was open. But there wasn't a single piece of treasure inside. A sly little smile spread across June's face. He figured they'd be pretty surprised after all their effort and the 9 sacrifices they'd made. The hunter whirled on him in a panic, demanding to know how he knew that. June told them they could stare at the empty chest all day for all he cared. All day, Kate had been busy fighting off the merfolk. He explained that he'd scouted the place out right after their phone call yesterday. But this was a massive fault line. You couldn't just wander in like it was your own backyard. June let out a long, dramatic sigh. He almost felt sorry for them, since taking him hostage was basically signing their own death sentence. The hunter grabbed him by the shirt, yelling at him to cut the nonsense. The hero simply reminded them they didn't really have time for a chat. The red line and the rewards were gone, but Sheriff the boss was still right there. The shark was already closing in. June gave it a little nod and it lunged for the blonde. Its jaws snapped shut and blood filled the water. That's one guy not making it back. It was unbelievable. The boss was actually taking orders directly from June. The hero calmly started walking toward the exit. He told the shark to clean up the remaining trash, and in return he'd let it live. Thrilled to have 3 victims today, Sheriff was quick to uphold its end of the deal. He was quite pleased to punish those who killed other hunters just for loot. Kate sat by the sealed doors, her face wet with tears. She blamed herself for what had happened. Striking the ground, her oath's aura pulsed red. She felt she should have been there to protect him. She regretted entering the great rift. Her eyes burned with pure fury. The entire cave began to tremble. She was about to unleash her power. Just then, June appeared from the boss room and called out her name. She didn't answer. He gently shook her shoulder, seeing she looked faint. Jill couldn't believe it was him. She rushed into his arms, sobbing with relief. He gently patted her back, assuring her over and over that he was fine. Once she finally calmed down, he suggested it was time to head home. He kept reassuring her, saying they had done a great job for the day. So a delicious treat was in order. As Jill walked ahead, Jun recalled the strange energy he'd felt moments before. It was a fiery power that grew more intense with every passing second. He'd never experienced a sensation quite like it. He even felt that same power inside himself. Perhaps it was a hidden skill. After leaving the rift, they grabbed some snacks and started for home. While Jill was doing chores, a bizarre noise suddenly caught her attention. She turned to see Yoji riding a strange robot vacuum around the living room. When she asked where he got it, the dragon called it his destined soulmate. She could only sigh. She suggested returning it since its owner was probably frantic. But Yoji insisted the vacuum had already chosen him as its partner. He refused to let anyone tear their powerful bond apart. With paws outstretched, he playfully chased her around the room. Jill just laughed and agreed to let him keep the vacuum. Then, noticing a weird smell, she suggested it was time for a bath. The dragon complained the whole time, so Jill told him to finish washing himself. Leaving the bathroom, she ran into Jun, who commented that she looked busy. She explained it was nothing, she was just giving Yoji his bath. Jun was annoyed that the dragon still couldn't even wash himself properly. He even suggested they should just get rid of the useless creature. Yoji overheard everything, a single dramatic tear rolling down his cheek. Changing the subject, Jill remembered she had something important to ask her dad. The Hunter Festival was happening tomorrow, and she wanted them to go together. Jun had never heard of it, though it was an annual event. It had gear shops, concerts, and even public sparring matches, plus you could get advice from famous hunters. He hesitated. He really didn't want to run into other hunters. But on the other hand, it would make his daughter incredibly happy. Seeing his hesitation, Jill said he didn't have to go, understanding he was busy. Jun suddenly recalled a line from his How to Be a Good Dad book. He quickly agreed, saying he'd be happy to go with her. She literally jumped for joy and showered him with thanks. Just then, a soaking wet Yoji burst into the room. He wanted to go too, declaring he'd been saving coins just for the festival. A vein pulsed on Jun's forehead. The little monster had just ruined all of Jill's hard work cleaning up. The next morning, they arrived at the convention center for the hunting festival. The event was gigantic, with a sea of people flooding the area. Perched on Jill's neck, Yoji whined that he could perfectly well walk by himself. But she wouldn't put him down. A little guy like him could easily get trampled. Plus, she knew he just wanted to dash off and buy some snacks. He was just biding his time, which is exactly how he scored that robot vacuum. And sure enough, a small pouch filled with coins was hanging on his back. He had prepared so diligently for this day. Jill laughed, telling him to save his coins. If he behaved, she promised to treat him. Jun offered to carry the little dragon, but Jill insisted he wasn't heavy for her. Besides, Yoji showed no desire to be held by his strict master anyway. They settled into a cafe nearby and ordered some baked goblin ribs. Jun looked skeptical, while Yoji was practically drooling at the thought. This would be his first time ever eating them cooked. Jill skillfully speared a piece for the dragon. The verdict, absolutely divine. He never imagined that if you actually roasted a goblin first, you could unlock such an amazing flavor. As Jill offered some to Jun, he was already passing a rib to her. Suddenly, a tiny but vicious dog barked, looking fiercer than any dungeon boss. The group just stared silently at its attempt to look intimidating. Yoji puffed out his chest, clenched a fist, and yelled at the dog to scram. He called it a troll spawn, and the dog yelped, bolting for the exit. Seeing signs everywhere, Jill suggested Yoji might need a collar since all pets required leashes. The little dragon immediately leaped right onto the table. He declared he was not a pet, but a security specialist. His duty was to oversee the master and his daughter's safety. Jun's only reply was a stern, "Get off the table." He then asked what this so-called defender did other than raid the fridge. Jill bathes him, plays with him, and tucks him in. So, who is protecting whom? He told him to just eat quietly so they could hurry up and get going. After their meal, they visited a nearby shop and bought Yoji a collar. The dragon grumbled he'd just pretend it was a pricey family heirloom. While walking the fair, their attention was caught by hunters at a shooting gallery. One hunter aimed his mana pistol and took a shot at the target, but the mana blast suddenly flew high. The owner spotted them, sidled up to Jill, and invited her to try. Jill tensed. She really wanted a turn, but she knew she couldn't afford it. Yoji, however, was already grabbing his coin pouch. It cost 100,000 won, and the main prize required hitting 10 targets. That was way too much money to gamble. But the owner stopped them, dangling the grand prize an 8 million won elf ring. The last guy hit 3 targets and only got a buffalo potion for it. He was breathing hard from the exertion. He grumbled that he wasn't even sure the targets could fall. The shop owner just smiled, thinking of his rigged targets, especially the last one made from S-rank monster bones. The standing record at this booth was only 5 hits out of 10. He was sure even the Sword Emperor himself couldn't possibly hit them all. Jun's voice snapped him back to reality. He said he'd give it a shot and handed over the fee. Yoji gave his master a disapproving look. Always greedy for food, but so quick to waste money on a silly game. Jill tried to object, but Jun had already fired off 3 quick shots. To everyone watching, it looked like he completely missed the mark. The owner announced no targets were hit, offering a plush toy as a consolation prize. He ducked behind the counter, rummaging through the prize box. Then he noticed targets 8, 9, and 10, the hardest ones, were shattered. Jun just smiled, saying his daughter wouldn't be needing a stuffed animal. The owner stared at the targets again. They were blown to bits. This was impossible. A new wave of panic washed over him. What kind of prize was he supposed to give for this? He'd only just paid off the loan for that elder elf ring. This was a total disaster. Jun overheard offering to take a low-rank ability ring as a prize instead. For the owner, it was a moment of pure salvation. With tears in his eyes, he gratefully handed over the ring. Jill slipped it on her finger in total disbelief that it was really hers. Our hero quickly said that a simple thank you was more than enough. Jill happily agreed and thanked her dad. Content: the group continued their stroll through the fair. The hunter before them complained about not getting a ring, but the owner quickly said he was closing up. He was terrified Jun might return and clean him out completely. He just shoved a stuffed animal at the hunter and asked them to leave. With Yoji perched on his head, Jun and Jill headed for the main stage, Jill admiring her new ring. On stage, a speaker explained how the first rifts appeared 10 years ago. It seemed to be some kind of public history lesson. He was talking about the emergence of rifts and the first hunters. Jill suggested they listen, hoping it might jog her dad's memory. Jun suddenly froze, and Jill asked if he'd remembered something. He clutched his head, saying a few things were coming back, but he'd been so focused on work. He added that he was really grateful for all the housework she handled. There was no way he could have managed it all on his own. Yoji chimed in, saying he figured Jill was his employee, not just a helper. Our hero shot him a death glare, his anger starting to simmer. A moment later, the little dragon was sporting a new bump on his head for that comment. The host continued asking the crowd where the very first rift appeared. Instantly, someone from the crowd yelled out the correct answer. The man was invited on stage to claim his prize. What a lucky guy. Getting bored, Yoji started begging Jill to go check out the food stalls. The host then moved on to a rift that opened up 3 years ago. This tale was about the dragon Masalis. Its claw had killed 857 people and wounded about 2,000 more. Jill gave Yoji a sharp look, warning him to never try that again. With his head held high, he declared that was for lesser dragons. They ran wild outside, but he was far more dignified. Yoji found himself missing his cozy lair. He looked to Jun, asking to return to his solitary life. Jun smirked. No more of Jill's famous ribs. Then the dragon called him a sly fox and clung to Jill. He genuinely loved his life protecting this girl. Jun chuckled, then noticed a stir by the stage and suggested they check it out. Near the stage, a crowd was busy taking photos with someone. It had to be some famous hunters. As they got closer, Jun saw who was at the center of all the attention. Their faces looked incredibly familiar. but he just couldn't place where he'd seen them. Suddenly, Jill shrieked, "It's the Macy Guild," and it all clicked for Jun. He asked if she wanted a picture. With a scream, she dashed right over to them. Getting a photo with them was a dream come true. She asked Alan for a picture, and he quickly called over Mira and William. Jill then yelled for her dad to hurry up and join the photo. Jun reluctantly joined posing with people who owed him their success. He stood right in the middle as they all posed for the picture. Of everyone there, Jill had the biggest smile. Jill thanked them, and Alan said they were honored by her interest in their guild. Jun then asked his daughter about getting a snack catching the hunters' attention. He watched them leave, trying to overhear their conversation. Mira walked over asking why he was staring so intently at them. Ignoring her question, Alan suddenly bolted after them. He called out asking them to wait up. He just needed a minute. Jun turned and asked how he could help. Alan's team quickly caught up, and he finally asked, "Are you by any chance the hunter Ethan Liu?" Jill recalled the ID card she found in her dad's room with that exact name. Yoji tried to cut in, saying they were in a rush to the food court. Jill quickly covered his mouth, then turned to her dad, asking if he was okay. He told Alan he was mistaken, that he wasn't Ethan Liu. The hunter bowed his head in apology. It seemed he had made a mistake. Our hero didn't think it was a big deal. Mistakes happen. They turned to continue on their way. But Alan was sure. It was the hunter from the rift. The mask was to hide his identity. Just then, more fans rushed over asking the guild for photos. That was clearly the end of their conversation for now. Everyone involved knew they would meet again, but this just wasn't the time. After another hour at the festival, they headed home completely exhausted. Jun watched Yoji cruise around the house on a robot vacuum. His precious body would no longer have to move on its own. At home, he had this marvelous device. Outside, he had Jill. Jun couldn't help but clench his fist. He really wasn't thrilled being Jill's personal taxi service. Yoji waved at the girl vacuuming, asking her to keep it down for Jill's favorite show. She looked up from the TV, asking her dad why he was in a suit. Jun avoided the details, not wanting to make her anxious. So he just said he had to head out for a little while. Suddenly, a news alert flashed on screen about a huge fault on Mount Wumian. Yoji realized where that was. It was way too close for comfort. Jill overheard them. They could actually see the mountain from their window. In an instant, the girl and the dragon were pressed against the window. The view was both breathtaking and absolutely terrifying. Jun's phone buzzed, shattering the silence. He answered. It was Nate. The team was waiting at the office. The situation was critical. Jill looked from her father's face to the strange sight outside. The crack was visible from their home, a massive growing ring of red and black. On the scene, Emily was already close to the massive fault. In only 10 hours, it was as big as a 20-story building. She checked her status window. The crisis level had hit 2,000 and was still rising rapidly. The Masali's Dragon Rift had topped out at 2,200. But this rift's power level was skyrocketing. She addressed the other hunters. Roughly 100 hunters had gathered, mostly A and B ranks. There were only 7 S-rank hunters, including Emily and her partners Gale and Ray. The mood was heavy. The rift's power level was a huge blow to morale. Ray kept his eyes locked on the ominous rift. His feeling of dread was growing stronger by the minute. He briefly considered texting his mom his bank password just in case. A command center was quickly established in a nearby abandoned building. Gale reported in. Their forces were deployed and waiting for the go-ahead. President Adrian repeated that this was an exceptionally dangerous mission. Civilians were being evacuated to secure the perimeter around the rift. They had to be prepared for the absolute worst. Every hunter assigned to this mission understood the risks. And this time they couldn't count on help from the Behemoth Guild or the Sword Emperor. Adrian folded his arms, stating Gale was the only choice for commander. Before he could even respond, the unexpected happened. A loud siren echoed across the area, an emergency broadcast from Rift Control. It ordered all civilians to follow instructions and get to a shelter immediately. As the sirens faded, Gale promised he would do everything he could. But just doing their best wouldn't be enough this time. They could not afford to fail. The mission had to be perfect. Listening from around a corner, Emily decided not to interrupt them. Adrian revealed their intel suggested the outbreak would start in 2 hours. This information had a 70% certainty rating. If they can't stop the outbreak, monsters will swarm Seoul, creating a huge tragedy. The disaster would make the Masalis incident look minor. We must contain everything inside that rift, the president ordered at any cost. He gave the hunters their cue, telling them to get ready to move in. Emily slumped against the wall, sliding down just a bit. Pulling out her phone, she quickly dialed a familiar number. Back at Jun's place, things were tense. Jill asked if he was really going to work with all the news. He wasn't sure himself, but he had to get to the office. Still, she probably had a point. On the news, they said the rift crisis was over 2,000. Yoji suggested heading straight to the rift since it would be much quicker. Jun thought about it. It was definitely a tempting idea. He mulled it over for a second, but that would just make things more complicated. As he left, he told Yoji to protect Jill while he was gone. She shot him a look that could freeze fire. Jun just smiled, telling Yoji to imagine what would happen if the house or Jill got hurt. He stepped into the hall, reminding her to lock the door behind him. The moment he stepped outside, his phone began to buzz again. Jun answered, surprised to see it was Emily on the line. Emily sounded really worried and needed to ask a huge favor. He paused. This was not how he saw his day going. She went on saying he must have heard about the Mount Vian rift. Monsters were expected within 2 hours and the hunters planned to move in. Normally, Jonathan leads S-rank missions, but he's off with the Behemoth Guild in another rift. He wouldn't be back for another 3 weeks. So by President Adrian's order, Gale was put in charge of this whole operation. They only had 11 teams and 7 leaders, all S-rank hunters. If they could all just focus, clearing the rift should be possible. But Emily paused. The hunters were down, expecting a fight worse than Masalas. And then she finally got to the real reason for her call. Jun needed a minute. He ended the call and found a nearby bench. After sitting for about 10 minutes, he was ready. It was time to make a tough call. He took a deep breath for courage, then dialed Nate. He simply said he wouldn't be able to make it in to work. His colleague said he understood and would let the boss know. Jun thought it was weird that he didn't ask why, so he added that he'd head to the office as soon as he was done. Emily's words rang in his ears. She knew he had his reasons for hiding, but it was just one favor. She wanted Jun to take command, to lead the fight, and protect everyone. Meanwhile, back at headquarters, the mood was incredibly tense. Gale was leaning against a wall. His head was pounding. Him commander of this whole crew. If he gave an order, would anyone even listen? Emily cut through his thoughts, reminding him the president put him in charge. But even with Adrian's order, she wanted someone else to lead them. He couldn't believe it. She was asking him to step aside for that rookie June. She lowered her head, assuring him it wasn't a joke. Gale wondered if she really thought the other hunters would just agree to this. But the huntress knew they wouldn't, so the two of them had to sell the same story. They just had to convince everyone it was a direct order from the president. That way no one could refuse. He exploded in fury, his voice booming. He couldn't grasp what was going on with her or her ridiculous decisions. It looked like steam was literally pouring from his ears in sheer anger. Just then, Jun offered a calm hello. Emily rushed over, relieved he actually came. She was incredibly grateful. Gale also marched over, demanding to know what was going on. What made him think he could take command in such a complicated rift? Jun simply replied that if his help wasn't needed, he could always leave. After all, they were waiting for him back at his City Hall office. Emily stepped right in front of Jun and started yelling back at Gale. With every passing second, the whole situation felt more like a weird dream than reality. Jun cut in, asking when they could finally enter the rift. That could only happen after an official order from the director. They expected it within hours, since they had to get in there before the outbreak. Suddenly, a man's voice from the entrance asked who this guy was. It was Ray, who glared at Jun, noting this area was off-limits to civilians. Emily introduced Jun, stating he would be today's operation commander. And right on cue, the debate over his qualifications started all over again. Ray shouted that they were short on S-rank hunters, yet they brought in some bureaucrat. Emily stated again that it was Adrian's order and there was nothing to discuss. Gale leaned on the table, admitting he was also curious why the order was given. But an order was still an order. A tiny smile played on Emily's lips now that Gale was siding with her plan. Just then, Jun appeared at the window, saying he needed to prepare something. He told them to continue the meeting and that he would be back soon. The team stared after him in total amazement. The man just did as he pleased with such confidence. With that, Jun headed straight for the rift. It was already over 60 meters wide, but he leaped inside without hesitation. He needed to scout it out from the inside. He moved swiftly between rocks, finding the perfect spot for observation. It was an S-rank rift. The sheer number of monsters below was immense. But a high-rank rift didn't mean every monster was also S-rank. He saw A and B-rank trolls, ogres, and even some creatures Jun had never seen before. One in particular caught his attention. It was a goblin with a strange skin color. He flicked a small stone at its head. This goblin seemed exceptionally dumb. The creature spun around in circles, trying to find what had hit it. At last, it looked up, pointing a wobbly finger directly at Jun. The goblin scratched at the huge rock, trying to climb, but it was hopeless. Its body then began to swell up strangely, like it was filling with liquid. A few seconds later, it erupted in a powerful explosion. Jun had already braced himself easily, jumping to the next rock. A deep crater now marked where the goblin had once stood. So the goblin itself was the bomb. Jun noted this rift's unique little feature. He pressed onward deeper into the fault to check the next section. Ahead, huge ogres were lying in wait. One spotted him and swung with a crushing blow, but this ogre wasn't much of a threat. The main hunter team could handle it. so Jun simply moved past, stunning the monster. While the ogre was still confused, he quickly advanced to the next area. Jun noted a lot of monsters in the rift that weren't in the official registry. Trying to clear the rift in this condition would be extremely dangerous. He saw odd yellow stripes on the ground and landed lightly on one. Instantly, a clap of thunder echoed as lightning struck that exact spot. A sharp pain shot through his head. A hit like that would kill a normal hunter. Alright, so stepping on the yellow stripes was a very bad idea. This rift was massive, full of traps and monsters, just as you'd expect from a high-rank gate. The Hunter Academy continued to monitor the rift's unstable energy levels. An assistant rushed into the director's office. That was almost never good news. But this time he reported the crisis level was falling. The outbreak was now delayed by 15 minutes. Adrian gave his assistant a puzzled look. He couldn't figure out why this was happening. There were only two possible explanations. Either the rift was closing on its own or the monster count inside was dropping. But if the rift were to stabilize by itself, the energy readings would be falling much more rapidly. The president suggested sticking to the plan, but seeing their expressions, he asked what was wrong. The assistant cut him off, saying the operation would proceed in 30 minutes as planned. Gale went to Emily and relayed the president's orders to begin the raid in 30 minutes. He was getting worried about where Jun had vanished. No one had seen the guy for a solid hour. He figured the manager took one look at the situation and just bailed. Emily was furious. Jun wasn't that type of person. If he didn't want to help, he wouldn't have come. Gale just snapped right back at her. How could she possibly know that he didn't realize they were that friendly? Besides, it was weird he showed up just from her call. I didn't run away, a voice said. Jun was right behind him. The hunter froze solid. He couldn't understand it. He hadn't felt his presence at all. Jun handed Emily some documents, asking her to distribute them to each team leader. Gale's mind was reeling. He'd been ranked 7th among hunters for over 8 years. So how could he fail to sense this guy's presence? Was it stress? No, stress wouldn't do this. That left only one possibility. This guy was much more than he appeared to be. Jun cut to the chase, asking when they could enter the rift. With less than 30 minutes left, there was just enough time for a quick briefing. He asked everyone to gather around. All the hunters on this mission assembled near the command post. They stared in total disbelief at the young man standing before them. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Was the administration setting them up to fail with him in command? Nobody understood why the president chose this kid to lead such a critical mission. The hunters were more than a little skeptical. They demanded an end to this circus, shouting for Gale's immediate return. As Emily tried to defuse the situation, Jun calmly observed the growing chaos. Jun called for quiet, his voice cutting sharply through the hunters' uproar. Instantly, the shouting stopped. All eyes locked onto him, feeling the immense presence rolling off the man. Jun calmly announced the meeting's start, leaving the hunters completely stunned. Nobody could figure out what was happening. Sam from the Icarus Guild felt his defensive skills activate automatically. Jun continued thanking them for finally giving him their attention. He nodded to Emily, asking her to pass out his prepared documents to the team leaders. She moved through the crowd and started handing out the papers. He announced they were receiving a map of the rift's interior, shocking the hunters. A map to an unexplored rift. How was that even possible? The map was sectioned into 9 zones from A1 to A9. As he explained the attack plan, Sam raised his hand with a question. Sam demanded to know if there was any proof the map was real. Jun simply said they wouldn't believe any proof, then asked for other questions. Gale stepped in, insisting Jun had to answer that. He then clarified that their belief was their problem, not his. Besides, the hunters still had questions about who he even was. Jun replied that he would explain all of that later. He explained that Rift Control staff members have a special app. The app shows all registered Rift data, which he also had on his tablet. Sam yelled again, saying Jun was just making fun of them. Gale urged him to stop the sarcasm, reminding him that lives were on the line. But Jun remained perfectly calm. He understood their nerves. This was the biggest rift since the Misail's incident, and their commander was just some civil servant with papers he called a map. He knew they wouldn't want to trust that map with their lives at stake. He guessed that no one here truly believed this mission could succeed. In fact, probably the opposite. Everyone here likely expected this mission to end in total failure, but for this operation to succeed, they absolutely had to trust him. He was asking them to please place their trust in him. Their victory would depend on the amount of faith they had in him. And if they trusted him, he promised everyone would return alive. After his heartfelt speech, everyone listened intently to Jun's every word. And so, 30 minutes later, the teams entered the rift. The hunters moved cautiously, scanning the strange world inside the gate. Rai shouted in surprise. The manager had been right. The map was perfect. Jun's voice came over the comms, directing teams 1 through 5, Squad A to Zone A7. Teams 6 through 10, Squad B, were assigned to handle Zone A9. The 11th team, the supply unit, would follow Squad A. He ordered them to report any issues immediately, and then gave the command to start. With a mighty roar, the hunters charged into their assigned zones. Emily gave Gale a quick bow. It was finally time to fight. Gale watched as his squad charged into the fight. A fellow hunter yelled that it was time to move out. Emily silently thanked him, promising a dinner treat after this. With a happy shout, he leaped right onto the ogre. Sam called him a dummy for ruining the surprise attack. Squad B was on standby when Jun announced Squad A's attack. Rai instantly sprang to his feet. He rallied his troops, yelling that they wouldn't lose today. The hunters let out a mighty war cry. Spirits were high. Jun directed his troops from a cliffside vantage point. He hoped they could clear this rift nice and fast. The president watched the footage, wondering who was leading the raid. Gale landed a perfect strike, sending the ogre's head flying. As the tank, Sam's job was to punch monsters really hard. The battlefield was chaos, with dozens of hunters taking on foes. Gale focused his mana, then slammed his fist into the ground. The shockwave obliterated a horde of monsters. Sam was impressed. That was just the power he expected. The fight was tough, but they cleared the area. Surrounded by fallen monsters, Gale reported Area A7 was clear. The coordinator praised them for a job well done. He gave the green light for Zone A8. Sam jogged over to chat with Gale. He joked that if he were president, Gale would be commander. Gale told him to focus up. Sam just sighed about Adrian's strange plans. But Gale couldn't help but smile at one happy thought. A nice dinner with Emily once this was all over. Jun halted the squad, laying down some important new rules. They were approaching black goblins that either attack or self-destruct. If they explode too close, it's instant death. Armor won't help. The good news, they never attack first. So as long as they were careful, it would be fine. The hunters followed him in a line like he was their tour guide. He stopped them at some yellow lines, warning of electric traps ahead. Step on one and it's instant death. Sam nervously asked if anyone had actually stepped on one. Jun said they didn't need to test it personally. He picked up a rock and tossed it onto the yellow line. The second it hit, a huge electric blast lit up the area. The hunters realized it was a 100% fatal trap. Not even an S-ranker could survive that. Jun said the real problem wasn't the traps, but the S-rank Cyclops ahead who could one-shot them. Jun added that despite its power, the giant was super slow. So with a good strategy, they actually had a chance. He then asked the group who had crowd control skills. One of the hunters approached with a massive case. This wasn't a skill, but a special deterrent gun. It fired a net that could briefly stop the giant. He then asked how many they had. The hunter replied they only had 6, but that would be enough. With Jun in the lead, the hunters got into position. The raid was officially on. Group A, you'll engage from the front. Group B will flank from the left, right, and the rear. Snipers keep the giant suppressed and take out any mobs drawn by the noise. Jun noted traps covered every spot but the right side, a perfect sniper perch. Their number one priority was the goblin detonators. He announced he would personally lead all units except the net gun team. The orders were understood. The hunters began their coordinated attack. The giant almost seemed surprised by their bold move. But with its reflexes, it had no time to think. So the monster swung its massive club. The snipers got to work. With no other mobs around, they focused fire on the Cyclops. Dozens of blows rained down on the giant. They didn't do much damage, but they kept it busy. Gale landed precise heavy hits, yelling at his squad to keep up the pressure. The monster took another wave of hits, finding it hard to strike back. The attacks were coming from every direction. Sam charged straight at the giant, unleashing a flurry of punches. That seemed to really annoy the monster, and its eye locked onto Sam. He gave a nervous laugh. "Was that a bit much?" he asked, waving his hand. With a flick of its own hand, the monster sent Sam soaring. The net gun squad saw their opening and fired at the creature. The nets flew true, tangling and binding its legs tightly. Gale shouted that they'd done it. They had immobilized the giant. He gritted his teeth. It was time for the final decisive blow. In a few powerful leaps, he scaled the giant's body like it was a climbing wall. He remembered what Jun said, blinding it was the most important step. This was their best shot at winning, but they'd only get one try. Gale raised his sword over the eye when a huge hand suddenly shot toward him. Emily was already there, moving her own sword to protect him. At that same moment, sniper fire blasted into the giant's hand. Emily was knocked off the huge body. Gale just grinned. This was his chance. He raised his sword again and plunged the blade into the giant's eye. Blood erupted like a fountain as the monster roared in agony. Sam spun around. He heard strange noises coming up from behind. The dark explosive goblins had arrived, drawn by the commotion just as Jun predicted. The snipers radioed that there were too many goblins for them to handle. Jun took it in stride and gave an order to all 11 groups at once. He commanded them to fire at will and not save ammo. The hunters didn't hesitate. Hundreds of projectiles flew straight for the explosive dark goblins. The goblins began to blow up, trying to damage the hunters. But they were too far away, and the entire field lit up with their explosions. Their strength was rapidly fading. The battle took an hour, but miraculously, not a single hunter was lost. Gale gave Jun a nod of thanks for his brilliant leadership. They desperately needed rest, but there was no time. Jun ordered everyone to stay focused. Only one last monster remained. Jun urged them to find their resolve, saying the main boss was close as he pointed toward the horizon. The hunters gazed up, their expressions twisting into pure horror. This level felt utterly impossible to clear. They had never faced an opponent this massive or this powerful. Jun, however, was focused, already searching for the enemy's weak spots. Ahead lay a control line. Beyond it, a giant stood 300 meters tall. It was the Titan Marinuk. Flames roared where his hair should be, his eyes burning crimson. He stared down at the insignificant bugs below, patiently waiting for the fight. The system window appeared. Only 5 people could enter the boss zone, and anyone left outside would be ejected from the level. If they failed to defeat Marinuk in 1 hour, his army would hunt the survivors. Gale started naming the S-rank hunters who were ready to fight. It was himself, Ray, Sam, and Emily. But before Gale could name the 5th, June stepped in, saying he would go. He repeated the names Gale had called and told them to prepare for battle. Exhausted but resolute, Emily accepted his command with a smile. Gale eyed the mysterious Jun, asking if he even had a plan. The hero just walked ahead, noting the boss entrance was past the yellow line. The hunters followed his lead, crossing the yellow line behind him. The team was set. There was no turning back now. All the other hunters simply vanished, removed from the instance. Ray clenched his fist, saying their goal was to just survive as long as possible. Sam, ever the Joker, said he thought they had already won. He joked that the main warriors would get a feast, while the others were sent home. Then he turned to Jun, asking why he'd joined them since he wasn't a hunter. Jun replied that he couldn't find a way. Sam gave him a confused look, wondering what way he could possibly mean. Jun finished his thought, saying he couldn't find a way for them to win without him. Gale was stunned. This strange man actually thought they could win. Defeat something that was 100 times their size. A monster that towered over them like the tallest skyscraper. Marinuk began to stir. The battle was about to begin. Suddenly, a system alert announced Marinuk's abilities were being restored. The players were instantly frozen, their skills rendered useless. Sam started to panic. This wasn't fair at all. They were sitting ducks as Marinuk prepared to strike them down. The Titan raised its massive axe, aiming at the helpless ants below as the huge blade descended with blinding speed. Emily shut her eyes tight. This was it, the final blow. A moment passed, but the hit she was braced for never came. So she slowly peeked her eyes open.